You can skip to the next episode anytime using the timestamps.
The morning air, sharp like a razor, did nothing to cut through the hollowness that had taken root inside me. It was a cold, empty space, expanding with every click of Ruby's heels against the driveway. I watched her from the window, her designer handbag swinging like a pendulum, a metronome marking time, counting down to something I couldn't, or wouldn't, put a name to. The expensive leather of her coat, the precise way she moved, everything screamed curated perfection, a perfection that seemed to mock the chaos I felt inside. My coffee, a dark, bitter pool in a forgotten mug, sat abandoned on the kitchen counter. I'd poured it while she was getting ready, anticipating the quiet moment before her day began. But the quiet felt different lately, not peaceful, but hollow. Each surface in the kitchen, the gleaming granite, the polished chrome of the appliances, seemed to reflect the emptiness back at me. Everything was in its place, a shrine to the order and control that Ruby demanded. Underneath that veneer, though, I knew cracks were forming, spreading, like the tiny hairline fracture on her favorite crystal wine glass, the one she'd carefully hidden at the back of the cabinet, thinking I hadn't noticed. "Working late again tonight, honey," she'd announced at breakfast, her voice a practiced blend of polite detachment. Not a question, more of a statement. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped rhythmically against the screen of her phone, her gaze flitting across the endless updates and messages. Her attention, like her physical presence, was everywhere but on me. Big project. You know how it is. Lots of moving parts. High-profile clients. The words were a well-rehearsed script, delivered with a breezy nonchalance that did little to disguise the underlying tension. I did know how it was. It was always a big project now. Some looming deadline, some crucial meeting that required her undivided attention. 3 nights this week already, and it wasn't even Friday. The calendar hanging on the Phrygia sterile, stainless steel monstrosity that she'd picked out was a testament to her relentless schedule, covered in her elegant, almost illegible script. Late meeting, client dinner, project deadline. Each note, a small paper cut to my trust, an invisible wound that I could feel but not see. Her perfume, expensive and aggressively floral, lingered in the air. An unfamiliar scent, a new addition to her collection. I couldn't even recall her trying it on, asking my opinion the way she used to. When had she started wearing something new? The thought, unbidden and unwelcome, wormed its way into my thoughts. I moved through my morning routine, a series of well-worn rituals, straightening throw pillows that she always arranged just so, adjusting the thermostat to her preferred temperature, a cool 68 degrees that sent shivers down my spine. Everything was in its place, precisely as she liked it. A perfectly orchestrated performance of a life that was slowly becoming a stranger to me. The mail sat in a neat stack on the counter, like a silent accusation, mostly bills, credit card offers, and glossy advertisements. But one envelope stood out like a splash of color in a monochrome painting. Another credit card statement. My hands, despite myself, trembled slightly as I reached for it, my fingers brushing against the smooth, heavy paper. The numbers marched down the page, an army of silent accusers. Nordstrom, Saks Fifth Avenue, restaurants with names I didn't recognize or had never been invited to. Each charge a tiny betrayal, a small cut that, added together, was becoming something impossible to ignore much longer. The expensive leather of the kitchen chair creaked under my weight as I sat, the sound amplified by the unnerving quiet of the house. I traced the edge of the kitchen table, the polished wood cool against my fingertips, remembering when we used to go bargain hunting together at Outlet Mall. We'd spend the day laughing, comparing finds, celebrating tiny victories. Now, everything had to be designer, exclusive, expensive. The Ruby I married, the woman I had fallen in love with, wore sundresses from Target and got excited about finding a good deal on a new pair of shoes. Now, she wore Jimmy Choos and carried handbags that cost more than my first car. "It's just work stress," I muttered under my breath, the words thin and weak, lost in the vast, empty space of the kitchen. "She's just doing well, getting promoted, taking the next step. This is what success looks like." But even as I said it, trying to convince myself, something cold and heavy settled in my stomach, a leaden weight that seemed to drag me further down. My phone pinged with the urgency of an emergency. Another charge alert. Another swipe of her card, this time at some boutique downtown, one I'd never even seen. I closed my eyes, a sharp image flashing in my mind, of simpler times, of packing sandwiches and taking weekend drives, to nowhere in particular, just to be together. Now, our weekends were filled with her, networking events, and charity galas where I stood awkwardly in rented tuxedos, a silent, unnoticed shadow, while she worked the room, her smile, a carefully crafted performance for an audience I was no longer a part of. My fingers drummed against the kitchen table, a nervous rhythm against the polished wood, as another memory surfaced, unbidden and sharp. Last week's dinner party. Ruby had invited her new colleagues, including that guy Greg from marketing. The way she'd laughed at his jokes, touched his arm with an easy familiarity when she passed him a drink. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid, reading too much into harmless gestures. But now, with all the mounting evidence, I didn't know what to believe anymore. The house phone rang, the sharp, jarring sound startling me from my troubled thoughts. It was David, my best friend since college, the one constant in my life, the brother I never had. "Hey man, you free for lunch?" His voice, usually full of warmth and easy humor, carried an unusual undertone, a hesitancy that I couldn't quite place. Something wasn't right. "Yeah, I guess so," I answered, trying to sound nonchalant. But even the simple act of speaking seemed an effort. I glanced at my laptop, where work emails were piling up, unread and unanswered, as if they belonged to someone else's life. The usual place? Actually, David hesitated again, the silence on the line stretching, heavy with unspoken meaning. "Maybe we should try that new spot on Mason Street. You know, the one with the private booths?" Something in his tone, a deliberate casualness that felt forced and unnatural, made my chest tighten, a sudden, painful constriction. David wasn't usually one for privacy or for fancy restaurants. He was a beer and burger sports bar kind of guy, preferring the loud, crowded atmosphere of our regular haunt. "Sure," I managed to say, my mouth suddenly dry, the words feeling rough and unnatural in my throat. "Meet you there at noon?" After hanging up, I stood alone in the kitchen, a prisoner in my own home, surrounded by all the expensive things that were supposed to make us happy. The wolf range that Ruby had insisted on, but rarely used. The La Marzocco coffee maker that cost more than a mortgage payment. The designer fruit bowl filled with perfectly arranged organic produce that would probably rot before she came home to eat it. Each item a symbol of our carefully curated life. A life that now felt like a beautiful, elaborate cage. My reflection caught in the polished surface of the refrigerator man I barely recognized anymore. Shoulders slightly hunched, eyes carrying shadows that I couldn't remember being there before. When had I started looking so defeated, so utterly lost? I grabbed my keys, needing to escape the suffocating perfection of our house, a beautiful trap that was slowly crushing me. As I reached for my jacket, my fingers brushing against the soft fabric, I noticed one of Ruby's scarves, carelessly dropped behind the coat rack. It was a silk thing, expensive and delicate, carrying a trace of cologne that definitely, without a shred of doubt, wasn't mine. David was already waiting in one of the private booths when I arrived at the restaurant, the dim lighting doing little to hide the grim set of his jaw. He was nursing a beer, his usual easy smile replaced with a tight-lipped expression that sent a shiver of unease down my spine. The beer was untouched, the condensation beating on the glass like tiny tears. I knew that look, that somber, weighed-down expression. He'd worn it when he had to tell me my dad had passed, a heavy cloak of grief that had settled over him like a physical burden. "You better sit down, Bart," he said quietly, his voice a low rumble, sliding a manila envelope across the table with a deliberate, almost hesitant motion. The silence in the booth pressed in on me, thick and heavy. The envelope felt heavier than it should, weighted with something more than just paper. A sense of dread washed over me, a cold wave that tightened my stomach and made my breath catch in my throat. I opened it slowly, my fingers clumsy, each photograph inside like a physical blow, a brutal assault on my senses. Ruby and Greg, caught in various moments of Intimachia's secret life, laid bare before my eyes. Outside of expensive restaurants I'd never heard of, entering a hotel downtown with an easy familiarity that made my stomach churn, her hand lingering on his arm with a casual intimacy that was nothing less than a betrayal. Her laugh, captured in a freeze frame, ringing in my ears, mocking me. It was a laugh I didn't recognize, more genuine than any I'd seen at home in months, a sound that had been reserved for someone else. "There's more," David said, his voice flat, emotionless. He reached for his phone, his fingers moving with a practiced, almost mechanical precision. "Kelly, she's the PI. I hired. She managed to get some audio recordings. Thought you'd want to hear them." The words were delivered with a quiet finality, as if the decision had already been made. The first audio file crackled to life, the sound grating against my ears like nails on a chalkboard. Ruby's voice filled the booth, familiar yet alien, her words sharp and cold, devoid of any warmth or affection. That familiar laugh, a sound that once brought me joy, now felt like a cruel mockery of everything I thought we had. "He has no idea," she was saying, her words slightly muffled, but clear enough to cut deep. "God, he's so naive. Still thinks I'm working late." The casual cruelty in her voice sent a shiver down my spine, a cold, icy feeling that settled deep in my bones. Greg's voice joined hers, smug and self-assured. "What about the money? Did you transfer more to the separate account?" "Of course. He never checks the statements anyway. Too busy trying to pretend everything's fine," she replied, the callousness of her words sending a wave of nausea through me. "By the time I file for divorce, we'll have enough set aside too." I couldn't take any more. I hit pause, my hands shaking so badly that I almost dropped the phone. The restaurant, the tasteful decor, the other patrons, everything seemed to spin around me, the details blurring into meaningless shapes. All those late nights, the new clothes, the suspicious charges, they weren't just signs of success, not the result of a woman climbing the corporate ladder. They were breadcrumbs, tiny clues leading to this moment, this horrifying revelation, a carefully constructed trail of deceit and betrayal. How long? The words scraped out of my throat, raw and painful, the sound barely above a whisper. Kelly's been tracking them for 3 weeks, David replied, his voice low, carefully measured, but based on the financial records, it's been going on for months before that, probably. The rage built slowly, a simmering anger that spread through my chest like poison, eating away at everything I thought I knew. Each detail David shared pushed it higher, hotter, more intense. The secret bank account they'd opened together, a betrayal that felt like a physical wound. The weekend trips disguised as business travel, lies stacked upon lies, a carefully crafted web of deceit, the calculated way they'd planned to clean me out before dropping the bomb, a betrayal that felt so coldly, callously calculated, it took my breath away. There's something else, David added, his voice tight, almost strained. They're planning to leave next Friday. Kelly intercepted some emails. They've got tickets to Cancun booked under fake names. First-class tickets, paid for with my money. My wedding ring, a symbol of a promise that had been broken, felt like it was burning against my skin. I twisted it off, the metal warm and heavy in my hand, and let it clatter onto the table, the sound echoing in the silence. 6 years of marriage, a lifetime of hopes and dreams, reduced to a small circle of gold and a stack of damning photographs. I trusted her, I said, the words coming out as a whisper, barely audible, but carrying the full weight of a scream. I gave her everything. I know, man, David said, his voice full of sympathy. He reached across the table, his hand briefly covering mine, pushing my untouched drink closer. But listen, there might be a way to handle this. A way to make them pay. I looked up, catching something different in his tone. David was usually the voice of reason, the level-headed one who always told me to take the high road, to forgive and forget. But now, there was a hard edge to his voice, a coldness I'd never heard before, an intensity that made my stomach churn. Remember Kelly, the PI? He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, lowering his voice. She's got connections. People who specialize in dealing with situations like this. If you're interested. The mercury in my internal thermometer hit the top, shattered. The heat replaced by a cold, focused anger. In its place came something colder, more calculating, a chilling determination that sent a shiver down my spine. Tell me more, I said. The words, a low growl, the sound barely recognizable, even to my own ears. Kelly's office wasn't what I expected. Not at all. I'd imagined a dimly lit space with Venetian blinds casting film noir shadows, a place of secrets and hushed whispers. Instead, it was a modern, high-tech space in a high-rise downtown, all glass and chrome, sharp angles and sleek surfaces, the kind of place that felt both sterile and powerful. She sat behind a sleek, minimalist desk, her sharp features reflected in its polished surface, the light catching the cool, calculating glint in her eyes. So, she said, her voice crisp and businesslike, tapping a silver pen against her desk calendar, the sound echoing in the stark silence. David told me about your situation, about Ruby, about Greg. You want to make them pay. You want justice. It wasn't a question. I nodded anyway, my throat tight, my voice momentarily lost. The unspoken rage, the burning need for revenge was something I couldn't and wouldn't try to hide. The usual routes are boring, she continued, standing to pour 2 fingers of amber whiskey into crystal tumblers, the liquid catching the light. The sound of the liquid against the glass was sharp and precise, each movement deliberate. Divorce lawyers, asset freezes, public exposure. Sure, they hurt, but they're expected. They're predictable, something they've probably planned for. She handed me a glass, the weight of it feeling substantial like a weapon. You want something they'll never see coming. Something unexpected. Something that will hit them where it hurts. The whiskey burned as it went down, a fiery sensation that I welcomed, a temporary distraction from the coldness that had settled deep within me. "What did you have in mind?" I asked, my voice raspy, the words feeling rough in my throat. A slight smile curved her lips, a brief, predatory expression that was gone as quickly as it appeared. She opened a drawer, the movement precise and deliberate, and placed a small vial on the desk. It looked innocent enough, a clear liquid in pharmaceutical-grade glass, deceptively simple. "This," she said, her voice soft, almost hypnotic, "is something special, a custom blend of hormone treatments, the kind that can reshape someone, physically, mentally. It's designed to affect the very core of who they are." Her fingers traced the smooth surface of the vial, the movement almost caressing, as if it were something precious, originally developed for gender transition. But in the right doses, with the right additives, it can be used for other purposes, less expected ones. Understanding dawned slowly, then all at once, a chilling realization that sent a wave of nausea washing over me. "You want me to?" I couldn't even form the words. The implications were too shocking, too unthinkable. "Greg's pride is in his masculinity, isn't it?" Kelly's voice was soft, almost a whisper, the sound cutting through the silence of the room. The gym-built muscles, the alpha male attitude, that carefully cultivated image he presents to the world. What happens when that starts to slip away? When his body betrays him? When he becomes everything he's spent his life mocking? When the very thing that makes him feel strong becomes a source of weakness and shame? The whiskey glass trembled in my hand, the liquid sloshing gently. "Is it safe?" I asked, the question barely above a breath. A small part of me, a tiny flicker of reason, still holding on. Kelly leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable, her eyes fixed on mine. "Safe enough. Nothing permanent, unless you want it to be. But the psychological impact?" She snapped her fingers, the sharp, crisp sound echoing in the sterile space. "That lasts forever. It eats away at them from the inside out. It's the kind of damage that leaves scars." "And Ruby?" My voice sounded distant even to my own ears, as if I were watching myself from outside my body. The thought of what this would do to her, watching her lover transform before her eyes, a cold, satisfying thrill ran down my spine. "She'll watch it happen," Kelly said, the words like a promise. "Watch her strong, masculine lover transform into something different, something she'll barely recognize. By the time they realize what's happening, it'll be too late. They'll be trapped in a situation of their own making." Kelly's eyes met mine, cold and unwavering. The best revenge isn't just about hurting them physically. It's about destroying the very thing that brought them together, making them turn on each other, watching their perfect plan crumble. The vial caught the afternoon light, sending prismatic patterns across the desk, each tiny flash like a mocking smile. part of meth, the part that still remembered who I used to be. The man who believed in love and trust, wanted to run, to get out of there as fast as I could. But that part was getting smaller every day, being eaten away by the acid of their betrayal, the burning need for vengeance. How would we do it? I asked, my voice flat, emotionless, all traces of hesitation gone. Kelly's smile widened fractionally, the expression almost predatory. Ruby makes him protein shakes, doesn't she? Brings them to him at work every day? It's a routine, a ritual, something she probably thinks is a demonstration of her care and attention. At my nod, she continued, the formula is tasteless, odorless, completely undetectable. 3 drops per day. Within weeks, the changes will start. Subtle at first, mood swings, softening muscles, increasing emotional sensitivity. They'll think it's just stress. Then, more. They'll start to notice, and they'll have no idea why. She slid a small case across the desk. Inside, nestled in black foam, were 3 vials, each filled with the clear liquid, and a precision dropper. Everything was packaged neatly, ready for use. The choice is yours, she said, standing, her voice leaving no room for argument. But remember, they didn't hesitate to destroy your life, to break every promise, to trample on everything you held dear. Why should you hesitate to destroy theirs? I picked up the case, the weight insignificant compared to the burden of my decision. But as I thought about their betrayal, their calculated cruelty, something hardened inside me, a cold determination that pushed all doubts aside. When do we start? I asked, my voice firm. The question, once unthinkable, now felt like a necessary step. Kelly's smile gleamed like a blade in the darkness, a brief flicker of anticipation. We already have, she said, turning to her computer screen. The process began the moment you walked in, when you decided that enough was enough. And if you want, we can also arrange for someone to get a closer look at what's going on inside your wife's company. Someone who can be our eyes and ears and confirm all that we already suspect. We have the resources, and we have people. It's your call. She looked at me expectantly, a question lurking in her cool gaze. The idea took root like a seed, growing rapidly in the fertile ground of my anger and desire for revenge. A way to know for sure what Ruby and Greg were up to see their actions unfold in front of me. A way to see for myself how they planned to betray me. It was too tempting to resist. How would that work? I asked. The words a low, almost guttural sound, the hunger for knowledge consuming me. We have people, Kelly said, her voice confident. The word a simple promise. People who can get anywhere. They can get inside, and they can get you the information you need. Think of it as insurance. A way to make sure nothing is left to chance. A way to guarantee they will get exactly what they deserve. She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. And if you like, we can also set you up with a little something extra, so you can watch them squirm every minute of every day, just to make sure you don't miss a single detail of their downfall. A shiver ran down my spine, a mixture of anticipation and dread. The idea of watching them, of knowing every single move they made, was both thrilling and terrifying. But the need for revenge was too strong. Let's do it, I said, the words a cold, calculated promise. My voice was calm and low, but I felt a storm raging inside. I need to see this. I need to know everything. Kelly smiled, the expression predatory, like a hunter who has finally cornered their prey. Then we'll make it happen. Driving home that night, the case containing Kelly's vials tucked safely in my briefcase, and a new plan forming in my mind. I already knew exactly how I would begin, how I would make them pay for what they had done to me, how I would watch their carefully constructed world crumble around them, one drop at a time, with my own eyes, every second of every minute. From my home office, the cold light of the monitor illuminating my face, I watched Ruby deliver Greg's daily protein shake to his corner office. Kelly's team had done their work, setting up a series of discrete cameras throughout the office, feeding the images back to me in a steady stream. The video feed showed Ruby's practiced smile as she handed him the bottle. I could see her fingers lingering on his for a fraction of a second, a subtle intimacy that once would have sent a surge of anger through me, but now only produced a cold, almost clinical interest. 3 drops of Kelly's formula were already swirling in that innocuous-looking drink, and I watched, my expression unchanging, as their invisible work began. The screen flickered, the grainy footage of their office, a stark contrast to my cold apartment. It was like looking into a fish tank, observing their lives as if I was an unseen predator, waiting for them to make a single false move. I was finally getting a front-row seat to the slow implosion of their lives. The quiet hum of the monitor was the soundtrack to my revenge. The pixelated images, my daily obsession. The changes started slowly, almost imperceptibly, the camera capturing the nuances. Week 1, I watched Greg in a meeting through one of the cameras, his voice cracking like a teenager's, the sudden outburst of emotion shocking everyone in the room. He fled the conference room, and I zoomed in, watching him splash water on his face, his hands trembling slightly, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. He was starting to feel it, the subtle shift, the creeping unease. I felt a small spark of satisfaction, the first sign that my plan was working. By week 2, the feed from the office gym showed Greg struggling, his legendary workout sessions becoming shorter, the sweat on his brow, the pained expression on his face, the subtle wobble of his body as he strained to lift the weights. He'd mutter, "Just tired," his voice weak, pulling self-consciously at shirts that seemed a little looser each day. The confident strut that had carried him through the office became less pronounced, his shoulders slightly hunched, as if trying to hide. His body, the temple he had so carefully crafted, was slowly betraying him, and I was there to witness it all through the camera's cold, clinical eye. Ruby noticed too. I could see it on the monitor, the way she watched him, the subtle frown that would appear when he teared up during a presentation, or when his voice wobbled on a call. I saw the confusion flicker across her face, the way she'd tilt her head as if she was studying him, trying to decipher the puzzle of his changing form. The strong, assertive man she'd chosen to betray me with was slowly dissolving, like sugar in rain, the confidence in his stride fading with each passing day. Her perfect plan, I knew, was about to face its biggest challenge. "Something's wrong with Greg," she said one evening, trying to sound casual, stirring her wine, that sickeningly red liquid swirling in her glass on the screen. "He seems different." Her voice, normally so confident and controlled, wavered ever so slightly. I kept my eyes fixed on the monitor, fighting to keep my expression neutral. Her image on the screen was so vivid, almost like she was in the same room with me. It was a surreal, detached view into their lives. "Oh, he's been so emotional lately. And his body," she trailed off, frowning. The image on the monitor zooming in on her face, on her carefully crafted features. "He's not as defined anymore. Says the gym isn't working like it used to. Maybe "He's just stressed," I offered, a rehearsed line, delivered with the cold indifference I now felt, speaking to the empty air, talking to the faces on the screen. The expensive bracelet he'd bought her with my money, glinted on her wrist, each sparkle feeding my satisfaction, my need for justice. Week 3 brought the physical changes Kelly had promised, each detail meticulously captured by the spy cameras. Greg's face began to soften, his jawline losing its sharp, chiseled definition. The muscle mass he'd spent years building started melting away, replaced by subtle curves. He started wearing looser clothes, canceling lunch meetings, avoiding the office gym he'd once dominated, trying to hide the truth from those around him. He looked smaller now, hunched over, defeated. His voice changed too, rising in pitch when he got excited or upset, which happened more and more frequently. The office alpha male who used to command every room now spoke in hesitant, quieter tones. The footage from the bathroom showed him examining his reflection in the office windows, running his hands over his softening chest, with growing panic in his eyes. I watched, my fingers twitching as I zoomed in, studying every detail, committing every single sign of his slow descent into ruin to my memory. During meetings, he'd wrap his arms around himself, as if trying to hide the changes in his body. The confident smirk was replaced by a nervous, uncertain smile. Other men in the office, who had once deferred to his aggressive masculinity, began treating him differently, some with confusion, others with barely concealed amusement. I saw it all through the camera's cold eye, a silent, unseen observer to his humiliation. One afternoon, I watched him in the break room through another of the cameras. He was crying, his hands shaking as he tried to button a shirt that no longer fit quite right. He looked up when someone entered the room, and for a fleeting second, his gaze met the lens of the camera, his eyes wide and frightened, like a trapped animal. The dawning horror in his expression, the realization that something fundamental was slipping away, the look of abject terror that passed over his face. It was a small victory, a tiny step towards my goal. "I don't understand what's happening to me," I heard him whisper, more to himself than to anyone else. His voice cracked, higher than ever. I zoomed in on his face, watching his lips form the words, a slow and methodical dissection of his suffering. I watched him through the camera as he fled the break room, leaving behind a half-empty protein shake, his every movement captured in the harsh light of the office. I watched him go. Tomorrow would bring another dose, another step in his transformation, and I would watch it all happen through the cold, unblinking eye of the camera. Ruby would witness it, her perfect plan crumbling. She just didn't know it yet. Kelly was right. The best revenge wasn't just about hurting them. It was about destroying the very foundation of their betrayal, one drop at a time. And I would watch every single second of it. An email popped into my inbox from Kelly. The report from our mole within the company. Greg has been canceling business lunches and is starting to avoid the gym. Ruby was also seen making some hushed calls to a doctor, likely trying to find answers to Greg's rapidly changing situation. The new audio recording was short but revealing. Ruby's voice, sharp and agitated, as she questioned Greg about his body. The report said she also made a call to her personal physician, a sure sign of the cracks appearing in her perfect plan. I watched them on the screen. The grainy footage a stark contrast to the precision of the information Kelly's people were gathering for me. The pieces were coming together, and my revenge was almost complete. The day I chose for the confrontation dawned cold and gray, matching the steel in my heart. In my home office, the monitors glowed, showing me the last feeds from Greg's office and Ruby's schedule. Kelly's people had confirmed the rendezvous location. The Grandview Hotel, room 703, their little love nest. Their escape was almost complete, but I knew exactly where to find them. I knew exactly where to make them pay. I watched as their images left the office, headed towards their prearranged meeting. My jaw clenched as I saw them both walking away from my life. Kelly sat beside me, her expression as sharp as the edge of a knife, a silent force of unwavering support. David stood by the window, the city sprawling below him, our silent witness and meticulous documentarian. The familiar scent of Ruby's perfume still lingered in the air, a cruel reminder of the life I had lost and of the woman who had destroyed it. I turned away from the monitors, taking one last look at the images that had consumed so many of my waking hours. "It's time," I said, my voice low, my gaze fixed on Kelly, the word a promise that I would not falter. We left my home, the cold air a sharp contrast to the simmering anger inside me, a fitting metaphor for the transition from surveillance to action. The city was a blur of gray as Kelly drove. I sat in the passenger seat, my thoughts dark, my hands clenched in my lap, my mind replaying their betrayal again and again, each memory fueling the cold fire in my chest. David was quiet in the back seat, his phone still held in his hand, a reminder that he was there to capture everything. The silence in the car was thick, pregnant with anticipation, the weight of everything that was about to happen. We arrived at the Grandview Hotel, a monument to their arrogance, the opulent lobby a stark contrast to the darkness that had settled in my soul. I could almost feel the cheap thrill they must have gotten when they planned their first meeting in a place like this. I could feel the cold satisfaction of knowing that their private fantasy was about to become their greatest fear. I knew they were in 703, their pathetic little den, where they had planned the final destruction of my life. Kelly's people had already deactivated the security systems, their expertise ensuring that we would have no unexpected guests, no interference. I reached into my pocket for the key card, a silent symbol of my own meticulously planned strategy, and I turned to look at Kelly and David, their faces grim, their expressions serious. I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that this was the end. I walked to the door of their room, a quiet, almost mechanical act, each step bringing me closer to the confrontation. With a nod to Kelly and David, I opened the door, a sense of cold, brutal satisfaction washing over me as I saw them inside, a pathetic caricature of intimacy. Inside, the scene was exactly as I had imagined it. Ruby was lounging on a silk chaise, her dress thrown carelessly on the floor, her laughter a grating sound against the silence that preceded our arrival. Greg sat on the edge of the bed, his face illuminated by the soft light of the room, his carefully crafted mask of confidence gone, replaced by a bewildered look. They looked at me, their faces a mixture of fear and confusion. Their time was over. "Bart?" Ruby's voice wavered, her designer purse clutched to her chest, trying to maintain some semblance of control. Greg's eyes widened, and I knew his entire world was about to crumble before me. What are you doing here?" "Funny," I said, my voice level, as I looked at Ruby, her image almost too pathetic to look at. "I was about to ask you the same thing. Shouldn't you be at work, or is this where you plan to spend your afternoon?" I looked at Greg, his face a map of fear. And I knew that this was the moment they had both been dreading. Greg tried to step forward, but his movements were uncertain. In front of me, he faltered. "You don't understand." Ruby started, her voice shaking now, her desperate tone a clear sign that her composure was starting to break, her usual elegance completely gone. But Kelly cut her off with a sharp laugh. "Oh, I think he understands perfectly," Kelly said, her eyes fixed on Ruby and Greg. And then, on the tablet I held up, the images a testament to their deception. The late nights, the stolen money, the secret bank accounts, the flights to Cancun, booked under false names. We understand everything, every lie, every deception. Ruby's face went pale, and on the tablet, I could see the fear on her face, her carefully crafted world beginning to crumble before her very eyes. "How did you?" she began, her voice shaking. "No," I finished for her, pulling up the images of the hotel room and their deception. "I had help, Ruby. The same kind of help that—" I gestured toward Greg, watching the realization dawn in her eyes, her mouth falling open as she looked at him, trying to find some explanation. In front of me, Greg's face crumpled. You did this to me?" His voice shaking, his eyes darting around, searching for an escape. "3 drops a day," I said calmly, never taking my eyes off her or, on the tablet, her image. In those protein shakes Ruby so lovingly prepared. Ironic, isn't it? The very thing that was supposed to maintain your masculinity became the tool of its destruction. In the hotel room, Ruby moved towards me, her practiced charm sliding into place, her tone desperate and pleading. "Darling, please. We can talk about this. Whatever you think happened, save it," I said, my voice cutting through the air, cold and sharp. I played the audio recordings on the tablet, each whispered word, each cruel sentence, a testament to their betrayal. "I have the recordings. Every conversation about stealing my money, every plan you made together, every laugh about how stupid, how trusting I was. The cameras captured it all." Greg sank onto the edge of the bed, tears streaming down his face. In front of me, a broken man. "My body, my career, you've ruined everything," he sobbed. Kelly moved to stand behind me. "Did you really think you could just take his money and run? That there wouldn't be consequences?" Ruby's composure cracked. Her purse hit the floor, plane tickets scattering across the floor. Her dreams of escape now scattered along with them. "You don't understand," she said, her voice cracking, the desperation now fully in control. "I needed more than this." She gestured at the room, at me, her carefully built life crashing down around her. "I needed someone who could keep up. Greg was everything you weren't. Strong, ambitious." "Was," I corrected, watching Greg flinch on the tablet. "Past tense." She spun toward Greg, her eyes wild. "Baby, we can fix this. There must be doctors, treatments." "It's too late," Kelly interjected, her voice clinical. "The changes have gone too far. The Greg you knew is gone." David stepped away from the door, holding up his phone. "The police will be interested in the financial fraud," he noted. "And I'm sure your company's board will love hearing about how their star employee was planning to embezzle company funds." Ruby's mask shattered completely. In front of me, she lunged, her carefully constructed world now in ruins. "I'll do anything," she screamed, her voice raw with terror. "We can start over. I'll be better. I'll be faithful. Just fix him, please." I looked down at my hands, then back up to the tablet, her face contorted with fear and desperation. "That's your problem, Ruby," I said, my voice flat. devoid of any emotion. You still think this can be fixed with promises and manipulation. This is the end of everything. Kelly's people emerged from the hallway, moving with a quiet, practiced efficiency. They surrounded Ruby and Greg in the hotel room. My wife's pleas turned to screams as they were led away, their carefully planned escape evaporating like morning dew. I watched as they were taken away, a place they had contaminated with their lies and betrayals. Their destruction was complete, and they would be left to face the consequences. I stood alone in the hotel room, the air thick with the weight of what had just happened, and for a moment I considered the space around me. I thought of the expensive trappings, a testament to the shallow values they held, and I wondered, what did they really mean if all of it was built on lies and deceit? "It's done," Kelly said quietly, placing a hand on my shoulder. "They won't bother you again." But as I watched them disappear through the door, their figures small and insignificant, I wondered what I'd really won. My revenge had been complete, devastating, perfect. But in destroying them, I'd lost something of myself. The tablet on the table was still active, but the images of their downfall did nothing to bring me any kind of solace. The hotel room felt colder than ever, filled with the ghosts of what might have been. Outside, the city lights flickered, casting long shadows across the floor. A door slammed shut, the sound like a final, terrifying declaration. David drove me home that night, neither of us speaking. In the car, surrounded by silence, I let the weight of everything sink in. What was I now if I had not lost a part of myself in their destruction? My hands still trembled slightly, but not from fear anymore, just a bone-deep exhaustion. The next morning, I sat in my home office, staring at the blank computer screen. The images of the hotel room were gone, but the memories remained. The expensive tastes of my former life, all a mockery of the happiness we were supposed to have had. Kelly called. Ruby and Greg were being processed. Financial crimes, their accounts frozen, their plans exposed. Greg's transformation, his own private prison. And Ruby, her own kind of justice, facing her shattered, broken reality. "You won," Kelly said, but her words tasted like ashes. I walked through my home, touching the things that I had chosen, not influenced by another, but my own decisions. In the silence of my solitude, I tried to find something to fill the space, but nothing could. Later, I found her wedding ring on the counter, a small, golden circle, a symbol of something that had died long ago. I held it up to the light, then dropped it into the trash. A physical ending to a chapter that I could never revisit. The sun was setting when David came to check on me. He found me in the dark, the only light coming from the empty computer screen, surrounded by the ruins of what I'd thought was love. "What now?" he asked softly. I looked at my empty hands, at the shadows across the floor. "I don't know," I answered. "I really don't know." The following days passed in a blur of legal meetings and police statements. Whispers followed Greg through the office. I caught fragments of conversations. Hormone problems, stress, illness. Sometimes I felt eyes on me, but I didn't care anymore. Ruby's lawyer reached out with a divorce settlement. She was willing to forfeit everything. The remaining pieces of her broken life now scattered in the wind. I listed the house a month later, just to be done with it. I couldn't spend another night there, amongst all the remnants of a life that was built on lies. The last time I saw Greg was through a window of a coffee shop. He hurried past, head down, body hidden. Our eyes met, fear and emptiness. He disappeared into the crowd, and I was no closer to the peace I had sought. Late at night, I stare at the walls of my new apartment, missing not the furniture, but the person I used to be, the one who could trust. That person is gone now, as destroyed as Greg's masculinity or Ruby's plans. I'd become someone else. The man who believed in love and trust seemed like a stranger. Kelly was right. The best revenge wasn't just about hurting them, it was about destroying something fundamental. But she never mentioned how it would destroy parts of me too. In the end, I got everything I wanted. But as I sit here, surrounded by none of the expensive things that filled my old life, I realize that winning feels a lot like losing. The bitter taste of victory lingers, a constant reminder that some broken things can never be fixed, including, perhaps, myself. The monitor sits silent and dark, but the images of their destruction remain, forever burned into my memory.
The sterile glow of my monitor was my only company that night. "You are always working, Jack," Harper's voice echoed in my memory, a faint whisper against the hum of the server room. Each line of code was a cold comfort, a poor substitute for the warmth I used to feel in my own bed. Beside her, I was Jack, a master of logic and algorithms, but I hadn't anticipated the illogical crash of my own marriage. It began with whispers, "A new dress. Do you even notice me anymore?" she had asked, her eyes searching mine, and ended with the sickening realization that my wife was gone, and that I had let it happen. What kind of monster have I become to not see it sooner? And what kind of monster will I become to get her back? The harsh fluorescent lights of my Palo Alto office mocked my isolation, their cold glare reflecting the endless lines of code that had become a substitute for connection. They were precise, predictable, unlike the messy, unpredictable nature of my marriage, a system I had allowed to break down. "Another late one, huh?" my colleague Ben had said earlier, his voice laced with annoying sarcasm. "You ever go home, Jack?" I'd just shrugged, lost in my code. My reflection was a grim reminder, hollowed eyes, graying temples, and the faint scar above my right eyebrow, a childhood relic, now a mocking symbol of a life traded for calculation. From the outside, I was the Silicon Valley poster boy. Prestigious job, a perfect house I never saw, and a family that felt like strangers. Harper, her bright blue eyes my sun, now carried shadows behind her smile, a silent plea I was too absorbed to hear. "Mommy's sad," Emily had whispered during one of those rare moments I was actually home. "Why doesn't Daddy play with us?" Her words, innocent and cutting, echoed in my mind. Our daughter Emily still greeted me with enthusiasm, but those moments grew rare, choked by my workaholism. Each missed bedtime story was another cut, a reminder of what I was losing. The signs had been whispers, not screams. "Is this all we are, Jack?" Harper's voice, once warm, now held a strain, her sentences trailing off, as if acknowledging the futility of talking to me. Her eyes drifted away, seeking something or someone who could fill the void I had created. Subtle changes crept into our home, rearranged furniture, replaced decor, a new designer piece every week. "Just something to brighten up the place," she had said, her smile tight, a frantic attempt to fill an emotional vacuum with material beauty. The house was no longer a home, but a meticulously staged scene, and yet I remained oblivious. Our dinner table, once a space for connection, was now a battleground of silence. Emily's innocent chatter, a lonely bridge between us. Harper's eyes, when they met mine, held disappointment and a resigned sadness that I could no longer ignore. Move fast and break things. The Silicon Valley motto. but I never intended to apply it to my family. Yet here I was, watching my marriage crumble like faulty code, and incapable of implementing the necessary fixes. "Are you even listening, Jack?" she had asked once, her voice cracking with frustration. Brad Newman slipped in like poison, smooth, undetected, devastating. He commanded attention at a startup mixer. "Harper, isn't it? Love that dress," I remember him saying, his disarming smile hiding a calculated predator. His eyes lingered on Harper, assessing her vulnerabilities. I saw him approach, his movements purposeful, and Harper laughed, her eyes sparkling in a way I hadn't seen in years. That stung. A brief pang of jealousy I quickly dismissed. Another alarm I ignored. "Just someone from work," I had told myself as they laughed, their heads close together. The changes in Harper accelerated. Designer labels sprouted in her closet, her hair styled with meticulous detail, as if seeking someone's gaze, someone other than mine. She frequented startup events, places where Brad's charm held sway. The hushed phone calls, the screen angled away, each interaction a knife twisting in my stomach. "Just networking," she would say, her voice tight, and I would force myself to believe her. The excuses flowed as smoothly as my code: late-night meetings, networking events, women's entrepreneurship gatherings. My debugging instincts screamed corruption, but I hit ignore on the error messages, hoping it would resolve itself. Brad's presence became a haunting shadow, his name a recurring echo in her conversations. He was everywhere and nowhere, his influence changing Harper, her demeanor shifting, her absences growing. Her perfume changed, exotic and demanding attention. Her movements carried a new energy, and she started dressing like she was always ready for a photo op. "You look different," I had said once hesitantly, and she simply replied, "Maybe I am." She was changing, like a program being rewritten by someone else's hand, and I just watched, my code becoming my shield against the truth. I buried myself deeper, each commit another nail in our marriage's coffin. Yet I pushed changes, hoping the system would right itself. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was the one who had created the very vulnerability Brad was exploiting. Across the breakfast table, Harper's gaze was distant, like a connection timing out. Emily noticed, her questions about her busy mom growing harder to deflect. I was losing my wife to a man who could sell dreams. And I watched, helpless as my family's source code was rewritten, line by line. The night the sickening truth finally settled, I didn't go to work. I sat in the darkness of our living room, the patterns of the ceiling my only focus, a silent echo of my own shattered reality. It was then I called Frank Martinez. He came highly recommended from the shadows of the tech scene, a private investigator who could unearth digital secrets as easily as I could code a new app. His office was a server room masquerading as a detective agency, a place where I felt strangely at home amidst the blinking monitors and data streams. Frank's reports arrived like punches to the gut, each revelation more damning than the last. Brad wasn't just charming my wife. He was systematically draining her bank accounts, his manipulations of finely crafted malware. Harper's savings, gone. Her designer wardrobe, funded by credit cards I didn't know existed. Brad orchestrated every purchase, every decision, like a puppeteer controlling a delicate doll. A rage ignited within me, not just for myself, but for her vulnerability, and his cruelty. But the financial manipulation was merely the surface. As Frank dug deeper, a more sinister pattern emerged. A plot woven around a familiar name, Richard Armstrong. The silver-haired angel investor, a Silicon Valley legend known for his philanthropy and sharp investments, had been a constant presence at those charity galas. his steel blue eyes and distinguished demeanor, always surrounded by hopeful entrepreneurs, a symbol of wealth and power. And Brad was using Harper as his key to the kingdom. The chilling precision of Brad's long game was what truly made my hands tremble. He hadn't just stumbled upon Harper. He had orchestrated our chance meetings with Richard, carefully positioning her as the damsel in distress, trapped in a loveless marriage. My workaholism, my emotional distance, my dedication to code, all weaponized against me. They were talking points Brad coached her on, creating a false narrative of neglect to fuel Richard's sympathies. The sting of that realization, the knowledge that I was a pawn in his game, was almost unbearable. The surveillance photos Frank provided showed the disturbing truth. Harper and Richard, heads bent close in conversation, while Brad loomed in the background, a shadowy puppet master. Each photo was time-stamped, a precise record of Brad's calculated manipulations. Harper was being used, her vulnerabilities exploited, her emotions twisted into a weapon to target Richard's wealth. This wasn't just about my marriage. It was a calculated act of theft. Frank's investigation revealed the disturbing depth of Brad's game. He had coached Harper, manipulating everything, from her body language to her conversation topics, turning her into the perfect lure for Richard's attention. She had become his unwitting tool, a social API designed to breach the defenses of a wealthy investor. Brad had studied Richard, his past relationships, his preferences, with the precision of a hacker mapping system weaknesses. My wife had become the honeypot in his elaborate trap. The recorded conversations between Brad and Harper, acquired by Frank, exposed the predator beneath the charm. Brad's voice, once smooth and persuasive, was now manipulative and cold, revealing his calculating intent. He would alternate between praise and subtle threats, keeping her emotionally dependent while subtly pushing her toward Richard. "You are perfect for this, Harper," Brad's voice dripped through my headphones. "Richard needs someone like you, sophisticated, beautiful, understanding. Just imagine the life you could have, away from your tech-obsessed husband, who probably doesn't even notice when you are gone." The words, meant to seduce, were to me a blade twisting inside the wound. Hearing Harper's voice, once so strong and confident, now laced with uncertainty and desperation, was another blow. Brad had identified her vulnerabilities, her loneliness, her unfulfilled dreams, her craving for validation, and had exploited them with surgical precision. He had created a dependency, making her believe that he was her only path to happiness. He was stealing her, bit by bit, and I had done nothing to stop it. The final piece of Frank's investigation revealed Brad's ultimate goal: Richard's substantial investment in a new venture. Millions in funding that would give Brad control over a significant portion of Richard's portfolio. Harper was merely a means to an end, a social tool Brad was using to access Richard's resources. It was all a game, a cruel, manipulative game with real-life consequences. Richard, it turned out, wasn't just another wealthy, clueless investor. Frank's background check revealed a man who had been burned before by similar schemes, his wealth a magnet for gold diggers and con artists. His ice-blue gaze, once dismissed as arrogance, now felt like the shield of a man who had seen the worst of human nature. Brad's elaborate plot, using Harper as an unwitting accomplice, had come dangerously close to succeeding. The weight of the revelation sat heavily on my chest, threatening to crash my entire system. My wife, a victim of my own neglect, was entangled in a web of deception that threatened to destroy both her and my life. Our marriage, like corrupted code, seemed beyond repair, and I had no idea how to salvage what remained. It was at that point, staring into the digital abyss, I realized that I had to take control. I owed it to myself, and to Emily to do something. The decision to approach Richard was a gamble, a high-stakes operation with no guarantee of success, a move that felt like executing a critical command with a corrupted system. I found him in his private office suite in Menlo Park, where the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the tech empire he'd helped build, a city of glass and steel that felt both magnificent and terrifying. He sat behind a desk the size of a conference table, a mahogany behemoth that seemed to dwarf even him, his silver-gray hair catching the soft afternoon light, those piercing blue eyes scrutinizing me with an intensity that felt like a diagnostic scan. I felt like a bug under a microscope, laid bare and vulnerable. I laid out the evidence with methodical precision, each piece carefully placed like a card in a high-stakes poker game. Frank's reports, the surveillance photos, the recorded conversations, a meticulously constructed narrative of betrayal, each detail a nail hammered into Brad's coffin. I watched Richard's face as he absorbed the information, his expression hardening with each new revelation, the lines around his eyes deepening, not with anger, but with the grim recognition of a seasoned soldier who had seen the horrors of battle before. There was a chilling calm about him, an air of controlled fury that sent a shiver down my spine. "They think they're so clever," Richard finally spoke, his voice low and dangerous, carrying the weight of countless past betrayals. "These young predators, with their practiced smiles, they see our wealth as a resource to be harvested, a weakness to be exploited." He picked up the photo of Brad and Harper at the charity gala, his manicured fingers tracing the edge with a deliberate, almost predatory precision. It was like he was studying his prey, mapping his weaknesses. What followed was a masterclass in calculated strategy. Richard's mind worked with the efficiency of a supercomputer, processing multiple scenarios simultaneously, calculating probabilities, formulating contingencies, and creating backup plans for backup plans. We met in secure locations, often late at night in his private office or aboard his yacht in the San Francisco Bay, where the rhythmic rocking of the waves provided a cover for our conspiratorial discussions. The very air around us seemed to crackle with tension, with a shared desire for retribution. Our plan was simple, yet intricate. Richard would play the role of the besotted investor, captivated by Harper's vulnerability, while appearing oblivious to Brad's manipulations, a performance of the highest caliber. He would propose a destination wedding aboard a luxury cruise ship, a floating palace in the Caribbean where we could execute our revenge far from the constraints of the law and the prying eyes of the world. It was an act of cold calculation, a carefully orchestrated trap designed to ensnare Brad in his own web. The logistics were planned with meticulous care, every detail accounted for. Richard's security team, a group of former military operatives who transitioned into private sector work, would pose as crew members, their movements fluid and silent, their presence a constant, unseen threat. Frank's technical expertise would ensure that security cameras experienced convenient malfunctions at critical moments, creating blind spots in the vessel's surveillance system. Even the ship's manifest was carefully curated to minimize any potential witnesses, ensuring that our operation would go unseen. I felt like a part of a carefully calibrated machine, each of us playing a precise role in an elaborate act of retribution. The weeks leading up to the cruise felt like a long, tense deployment, each day bringing us closer to the final execution. I watched from a distance as Richard played his part flawlessly, his interactions with Harper and Brad carefully calibrated to maintain their false sense of security, a masterpiece of manipulation. His expensive watches and tailored suits were props, his lavish gifts and romantic gestures a charade, designed to lull them into a false sense of security. I felt a growing sense of unease, an uncomfortable mixture of excitement and dread, like a programmer debugging critical code. under immense pressure. The cruise ship, a floating behemoth of steel and luxury, became our execution environment, a stage set for our dark drama. I observed from the shadows as Harper walked the deck in designer resort wear, her blonde hair catching the Caribbean sunlight, her movements betraying a vulnerability that Brad had skillfully exploited. There were moments when glimpses of the woman I had loved broke through her constructed facade, a genuine laugh, a flicker of uncertainty in those blue eyes, a haunting reminder of who she once was. But then Brad would appear, his hand possessively at her waist, and the mask would snap back into place, like a character on stage stepping back into their role. I found myself battling a mix of rage and despair, a battle I knew I couldn't afford to lose. Richard chose his moment with the precision of a surgeon wielding a scalpel. During the lavish reception, he delivered a toast to their future together, his voice dripping with an irony that only he and I could appreciate, the act of performance perfected to a deadly art. The champagne flowed freely, each glass laced with a fast-acting sedative that would render them unconscious, a silent and invisible weapon. The plan was designed to be efficient, swift, and brutal, a surgical strike executed with cold precision. I watched from my hidden vantage point as the drugs took effect, their insidious influence creeping into their systems, like a computer virus infecting vulnerable software. Harper's movements became increasingly unsteady, her designer dress a cumbersome burden, her smile faltering and forced. Brad's smooth confidence began to crack, his calculated charm dissolving into confusion. The mask he had worn so effortlessly now sliding off his face, revealing the predator underneath. Richard's security team moved with military efficiency, each member a silent instrument in our plan, intercepting them before they could cause a scene and extracting them from the reception under the guise of excessive celebration, their presence like shadows in the night. The precision of it all was terrifying, a carefully choreographed dance of vengeance. The lifeboat, waiting like a tomb, had been modified according to Frank's exact specifications. A death trap disguised as an escape. A precisely drilled hole, small enough to be overlooked, but large enough to ensure the boat's inevitable demise, would seal their fate in the unforgiving waters of the Caribbean. The sharks, known to patrol these waters, were our natural allies, our silent executioners. Richard's men lowered the boat with mechanical precision. The whirring of the davits, a chilling soundtrack to our revenge, an ominous lullaby to their demise. Cutting the lifeboat's tether felt like crossing a point of no return, a final and irreversible act that sealed their fate. The small craft bobbed in the ship's wake, growing smaller against the vast, inky expanse of the ocean, disappearing into the blackness like a memory fading into the night. The moon cast a silver path on the water, a silent spotlight on our act of retribution, a haunting reminder of what we had done. I thought I saw Harper stir for a brief second, a flicker of movement that could have been the play of shadows, the last gasp of a dying light, and a pang of guilt pierced my heart. Richard joined me at the railing, his presence solid and reassuring, a silent understanding passing between us. "It's done," he said simply, his voice carrying neither triumph nor remorse, as cold and unforgiving as the steel hull of the ship beneath our feet. The waves lapped against the ship, washing away any trace of our actions, the sound a chilling reminder of the ocean's unforgiving nature. In that moment, we were just two men, bound together by a shared darkness, by the weight of our actions, staring into a vast and unforgiving horizon. The taste of victory was bitter, the silence deafening. As the ship continued its journey through the night, I was caught in a maelstrom of emotions, a chaotic storm that raged within me. Satisfaction clashed with guilt, justice warred with revenge, and the stark reality of our actions began to sink in. We had executed our plan with impeccable precision. But as I stared into the darkness where the lifeboat had disappeared, I couldn't help but wonder about the cost of our perfect crime, and whether any form of revenge could ever truly mend the gaping wounds in our hearts, or if it would simply create more scars, leaving us forever marked by the darkness we had embraced. And I felt a growing fear that what we had done had changed us irrevocably, that we were not the men we once were, but something darker, something broken and irreparable. Returning to our Palo Alto home felt like entering a tomb, a mausoleum built of expensive materials and empty promises. Every piece of furniture, every designer item that Harper had carefully chosen, now mocked me, silent witnesses to the void that consumed our life, their presence a constant, painful reminder of what we had lost. The morning light that streamed through her carefully selected curtains cast long accusatory shadows across the walls, each space echoing with a deafening silence that seemed to press down on me with unbearable weight. The air felt heavy with her absence, her ghost haunting every corner of the house. Emily's questions were relentless, each one a painful twist of the knife in my heart. When is Mommy coming back? Her innocent eyes, a mirror image of Harper's, searched mine for answers I couldn't provide, her gaze a relentless reminder of my failures. The freckles scattered across her nose seemed to darken as she frowned, struggling to make sense of a world that had suddenly become unpredictable and terrifying. Her small face etched with a sadness that was beyond her years. Her pain was a constant reminder of the destruction I had caused. I had meticulously prepared a cover story, crafting a narrative to protect myself, like creating a script to navigate a new software system. The missing persons report I'd filed days before the cruise provided the foundation for our carefully constructed lie. The police interviews, the search efforts, the media coverage, all precisely calibrated subroutines in our elaborate revenge program, each detail intended to deflect suspicion and maintain our facade. But no amount of preparation, no amount of logic or planning could shield me from the raw, unadulterated anguish in my daughter's voice, the pain of her grief a constant, piercing reminder of my actions. "You sent Mommy away." The accusation came during breakfast one morning, delivered with the force of a physical blow. Emily's small hands were balled into fists, her pigtails trembling with the force of her emotions, her face contorted in a mask of grief and anger. Her cereal sat untouched in the bowl, the milk growing warm, mirroring the tears that welled up in her eyes, each one a drop of acid on my soul. "I want her back. Bring her back." Her words, a desperate plea from a broken heart, hit me like a denial of service attack, overwhelming my emotional defenses and leaving me exposed and vulnerable, crashing through the meticulously constructed walls I had built around myself. Guilt, a corrosive acid, ate at me from the inside out, an unrelenting torment that seemed to consume me. Sleepless nights stretched into endless days, each hour a grim reminder of the choices I had made. My clothes hung loosely on my frame, a testament to my lost appetite, and a constant ache in my gut became a familiar companion, a physical manifestation of my inner turmoil. I threw myself into parenting, desperately trying to compensate for my past failures. But Emily's grief proved resistant to my efforts, a wound that no amount of care could heal. I was a failure, both as a husband and a father, haunted by the ghosts of my past choices. Her teacher called, her voice laced with concern, to share the devastating news that Emily had become withdrawn in class, her bright spirit extinguished, her participation dropping like a failed application crashing under pressure. My daughter, once so vibrant and engaged, had become quiet and isolated, her face etched with a constant sadness, her light dimming with each passing day. she had taken to drawing pictures, endless variations of three figures. A tall man, a woman with yellow hair, and a small girl standing between them, each drawing a silent indictment of my actions, a haunting reminder of the family I had destroyed with my own hands. The visual representation of my failures, a constant reminder of the price of my revenge. Richard maintained our facade with unwavering precision, playing the grieving, almost bridegroom with an Oscar-worthy performance. His public displays of grief and his generous rewards for information helped deflect any suspicion, maintaining the carefully constructed narrative we had built to protect ourselves. But in those private moments, when we met to ensure our stories aligned, I caught glimpses of the demons that haunted him, a reflection of the darkness that had taken root in my own soul. The weight of past betrayals and the lingering question of our morality. He was just as lost as I was. The silence in our home had become a tangible presence, pressing in on me like a physical weight, filling the spaces once occupied by Harper's laughter, the soft click of her heels on the hardwood floor, her warmth now replaced with a cold and empty void. Emily's room remained a time capsule of happier days, filled with photos of her mother, her smile frozen in moments we could never reclaim. Each night, I'd find Emily clutching her mother's old sweater, breathing in the faint, lingering scent of Harper's perfume as she slept, trying desperately to hold on to a memory that was slowly fading. Her efforts, a heartbreaking reminder of our loss. The victory I had imagined achieving had dissolved like sea spray on the Caribbean wind, leaving behind nothing but emptiness and despair. Instead, I was faced with the stark and unavoidable reality that revenge, like a poorly optimized algorithm, had consumed all our resources, producing nothing but devastation and destruction. I had eliminated the source of my pain, but in doing so, I had irrevocably damaged the most precious part of my life, my daughter's happiness and her trust, and the very fabric of my own being. The cost had been far higher than I could have ever imagined. In my darkest moments, which seemed to stretch endlessly into the night, when the house felt most empty and the silence most deafening, I would replay the events in my mind, like a debugging session gone horribly wrong. Had there been another way? Could I have patched the vulnerabilities in my marriage before Brad exploited them, before it was too late? The questions looped endlessly, finding no resolution, a constant gnawing recursion eating away at my conscience, trapping me in a cycle of guilt and regret. Emily's words, "You sent Mommy away," had become my personal null-pointer exception, a fatal error in the core code of my existence that I could neither catch nor resolve. I had executed my revenge with flawless precision, with the skill of a master coder. But the cost of running that program had been far higher than I had ever calculated. The bugs I had attempted to eliminate had multiplied, manifesting in my daughter's tear-filled eyes, in my own sleepless nights, and in the gnawing void that now filled my life, proving that sometimes the most elegant solutions can still produce the most devastating outcomes, leaving behind a legacy of pain and regret. And the chilling reality was that I was the architect of that devastation, the coder of my own destruction.
She's not the woman I married. The thought slammed into me as I watched Emily's reflection in the darkened television screen, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips as her fingers danced over her phone. 3 months ago, our life was a storybook. Now, it was a mystery I couldn't solve, a puzzle built with late-night texts, hurried whispers, and the chilling realization that the woman I loved might be slipping away, one furtive exit at a time. But what I didn't know, the lies were just the beginning. "Hey, Mike, that steel beam's bent like your back," Joe, my coworker, snickered, his voice a sharp needle. I winced. Lately, jokes like that were hitting too close to home. Yeah. My back was bent. I was working my tail off for my family. For Emily. Shut up, Joe. Your brain's the one that's bent, I retorted, trying to keep it light. The summer sun beat down mercilessly, sweat pouring down my back. The construction site buzzed around us, metal clanging, power tools whining, workers yelling. My everyday reality. My phone vibrated. A text from Emily. Working late again tonight? Just one line, and it felt cold. Before, she'd have sent something like, "Be careful driving home, love you." Lately, Emily'd been acting distant, like she was putting space between us. Yeah, looks like it. Sorry, I replied curtly. A pang of regret hit the moment I hit send, like I'd mirrored her coldness. Okay. Her reply was even more curt. I sighed heavy. What's up, Mike? Fight with a girlfriend or something? Joe tilted his head, studying me. Yeah, kinda, I answered vaguely. I feel like there is a wall growing between my wife and me lately. Whoa, that's rough, man. But hey, Joe grinned, with a face like yours, you'll have no problem finding another woman in no time. You are an idiot, I chuckled, playfully slapping him on the shoulder. I have a family, Joe. I am not just going to throw it all away. Right. But everyone needs a break sometimes. How about we grab a few beers tonight? I hesitated. Considering the situation with Emily, a distraction might not be a bad idea. But really, I should be heading home. Nah, I am going to pass tonight. I am going to head home and try to talk to Emily. All right, man. Anytime you feel like it, let me know. Joe looked a little disappointed, but plastered a smile back on his face. We got back to work. Around 5 p.m., the foreman yelled, "That's a wrap for today." I packed up my tools, took a quick shower, and headed home. Driving, Emily was on my mind. She was acting strange recently, constantly glued to her phone, even in the bathroom, in the shower. She never used to do that. A bad feeling crept into my mind, but I pushed it away. Emily wouldn't do that. We fell in love, got married, had 2 kids. Couldn't be true. I pulled into the driveway. Kids came running out of the living room. "Daddy, you are home." "Hey there, little guys." I scooped them up in a hug, smiling. Emily was in the kitchen. She must have heard me, but she didn't turn around. "I am home," I said. "Welcome home." Her reply was curt. I took a deep breath and walked toward her. "I got home early today. Want to grab some dinner together?" She looked slightly surprised. "Oh yeah, okay." Her response gave me a glimmer of hope. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe she was just busy and wasn't avoiding me. We sat at the dinner table as a family, the kids chattering about their day at school. Emily smiled occasionally, but I could tell it was forced. After dinner, once the kids were asleep, I turned to Emily. "Emily, is something going on?" She tensed slightly. "No, nothing really. I feel like you've been avoiding me lately." I kept my eyes locked on hers. "You're imagining things. I am just busy." She wouldn't meet my eyes. I reached for her hand, but she quickly pulled it away. "Hey, Emily, what's going on with us?" My voice edged with frustration. "Nothing," she trailed off. Just then, her phone buzzed. She snatched it up, checking the screen. Her face went pale. "Who is it?" I couldn't help but ask. "Just a friend," she stammered. I stared into her eyes. I felt like there was something hidden there, something I didn't know about. "Emily, if there is a problem, let's fix it together." My words trailed off. She wouldn't meet my gaze, holding her phone close like a shield. That night, we slept back to back. My mind wouldn't shut down. Emily's behavior, that phone, the invisible wall growing between us, it all felt ominous. I made a decision. Tomorrow, I was going to call my friend David. He's a private investigator. I'd ask him to look into Emily. I hoped with all my heart that my fears were unfounded. David, I need a favor. I held my phone to my ear, keeping my voice low. It was early morning, the kitchen dimly lit as I sipped my coffee. Emily was still asleep in the bedroom. Whoa, Mike. What's up? Did you get yourself into some trouble with the cops again after too many drinks? David's voice was laced with amusement. Save the jokes for later. I sighed heavily. It's about Emily. I could hear the change in David's tone on the other end. What's going on? His voice took on a serious edge. She's been acting strange lately, like she's avoiding me and she's always on her phone. I recounted the events of last night, a tightness forming in my chest. David, please, can you look into Emily for me? A long silence. I could tell David was contemplating. Mike, are you sure about this? There was concern in his voice. Depending on what you find out, your life could change forever. I know, I said, barely above a whisper. But I can't live with this uncertainty. I need to know the truth, whatever it is. All right, David finally conceded, sounding resigned. I'll look into it. But Mike, be prepared for anything. After hanging up, a shiver ran down my spine. Was this the right thing to do? But there was no turning back now. That day at work, it was like walking through a fog. Every swing of the hammer brought Emily's face to my mind, her kind smile, but lately, it seemed to be tinged with something dark. Hey, Mike, what's with the lovesick look? Joe's voice jolted me back to reality. Nah, nothing like that. I managed a weak smile. Just thinking about a few things. Tough times, man. Joe clapped me on the back. Too much thinking can fry your brain. In your case, it's probably already shorted out. Shut up, I retorted playfully. You are just jealous that your bad mouth keeps you from attracting women. Hey now, don't be harsh. Joe put a hand to his chest, feigning hurt. This light-hearted banter was a small reprieve. When I got home from work that evening, I noticed Emily quickly hiding her phone. Welcome home. Her voice held a hint of nervousness. Hey, I tried to sound normal. Anything happened today? No. She avoided my gaze. Just the usual. I started to speak, but the words wouldn't come. This distance between us, it was like we were strangers. Days passed while I waited for David to get back to me. My anxiety grew stronger. Talking to Emily felt like walking on eggshells. We both seemed afraid of breaking something precious, afraid to speak the truth. Even the kids seemed to sense the strangeness. Finally, David called. Mike, I have something to tell you. His voice was heavy. Can we meet? Yeah. I felt my voice tremble. I am on my way. We met at a small diner on the outskirts of town, a place we used to frequent back in college. David was seated by the window, a grim look on his face. He gestured for me to sit down, handing me a cup of coffee. I sat down. The bitter taste of the coffee matched the bitterness I knew was coming. Just tell me, I said, bracing myself. David took a deep breath and spoke slowly. Mike, I have bad news. Emily. He seemed to be searching for the right words. She seems to be getting pretty close to the new construction company owner, Brandon. I felt like something inside me shattered. What are you talking about? My voice cracked. They've been meeting frequently at cafes and... David trailed off. Hotels, too. My stomach churned. I covered my face with my hands. Proof? I asked, my voice a hoarse whisper. David was silent for a moment before handing me his phone. The screen displayed a picture of Emily and Brandon leaning in close, looking intimate. It was a cafe, I recognized. Emily's smile pierced my heart. Damit, I muttered. Mike, calm down. David placed a hand on my shoulder. What are you going to do? I took a deep breath and slowly lifted my head. I don't know yet, I admitted. But I need to confront Emily. Right? David nodded. Just try to keep your emotions in check, okay? I stood up. David, thank you. Any time. He offered a weak smile. We're friends, right? I walked out to my car, got in, and started the engine, but I couldn't drive right away. My head was spinning. Emily's smile, the photo with Brandon, our wedding day, the kids' birthdays, memories swirled inside my head. Why, Emily? I rested my forehead on the steering wheel, whispering to myself, and then I made a decision. I was going to face Emily tonight. I needed the truth. I needed to know what our future held. As I drove, I thought about the life we built in this town, the happy family everyone knew. Now it was crumbling. But I didn't want to give up. I wanted to get Emily back. I wanted to save our family. I took a deep breath at the front door, opened it, and stepped inside. I am home. I could feel the tremor in my voice. Emily's voice came from the living room. Welcome home. I steeled myself. Tonight, I would find out everything. Our future depended on it, even if it was painful. Mike, have you heard about Emily? I stopped dead in my tracks. It was Tom, the farmer from the neighboring town, in the produce aisle at the supermarket. His eyes held a mix of sympathy and curiosity. Yeah, I replied weakly. I heard. That's rough. A good guy like you. He shook his head. I cut him off, hurrying my cart along. Sorry, I am in a rush. Stepping out of the store, the harsh summer sun hit me in the face, almost mocking my situation. The news of Emily and Brandon's affair had spread like wildfire through Oakwood. It was the curse of small-town living. Everyone knew. Everyone was whispering. I got in my car, gripping the steering wheel tightly. It had been a week since my confrontation with Emily. The memory of that night was still raw. Emily, I need to talk to you. Emily, who had been watching television in the living room, turned at my voice. I saw a flicker of surprise in her eyes. What is it? She tried to sound calm. I took a deep breath and started about Brandon. The color drained from Emily's face. What about him? I know. My voice trembled. About you and Brandon. You are having an affair, aren't you? A beat of silence. Then Emily's tears started to fall. I am sorry, Mike. Her words pierced my heart like a knife. Why? I choked out. Was there something missing in our relationship? Emily looked up, meeting my gaze. I saw regret and determination in her eyes. Brandon is attractive. He's exciting in a way you are not. Her voice was soft but resolute. I wanted to find myself again. My anger flared. Find yourself? Is that why you betrayed your family? No, Emily cried. It's not like that. Her voice trailed off. A heavy silence fell between us. The car horn blared outside, bringing me back to reality. The traffic light turned green. I hurried to get going. On my way home, the stares of the townspeople stung, sympathy, curiosity, and contempt. I kept my head down. The streets I once walked with pride now felt like a living hell. When I got home, there was a letter in the mailbox. My breath hitched when I saw the return address. It was from my parents. Inside, a short note. Mike, we heard. It's tough. but we're on your side. Come home anytime. I pressed the letter to my chest, tears welling up in my eyes. When I walked inside, Emily was in the kitchen. We met eyes, but there was no trace of the love we once shared, just exhaustion and regret. Mike, Emily started. I promised Brandon I wouldn't see him again. I nodded silently, but the words didn't bring me comfort. Trust once broken is hard to rebuild. How are the kids? I asked. They're staying at a friend's house. Emily's voice held a hint of guilt. I just wanted them to get away from all of this. I sighed deeply. I had dragged my kids into this mess. That night, I sat alone in the attic, drinking whiskey. The stars in the night sky seemed impossibly distant. My phone rang. It was Joe. Hello? My voice was weak. I nodded silently, but the words didn't bring me comfort. Trust once broken is hard to rebuild. How are the kids? I asked. They're staying at a friend's house. Emily's voice held a hint of guilt. I just wanted them to get away from all of this. I sighed deeply. I had dragged my kids into this mess. That night, I sat alone in the attic, drinking whiskey. The stars in the night sky seemed impossibly distant. My phone rang. It was Joe. Hello? My voice was weak. Mike, how you holding up? Joe's voice was laced with concern. Yeah, I'm okay. I lied. You need to take some time off work. I'll talk to the foreman, but don't argue. Joe's voice was firm. You need to rest. He seemed to be choosing his words carefully. Everyone might need some time to cool down. I nodded wordlessly. He couldn't hear me. Thank you, Joe. After I hung up, the loneliness washed over me again. I opened the window and let the cool night air in. I heard a dog barking in the distance. The night in this town, which once felt so peaceful, now felt suffocating. Memories of Emily and I flooded my mind. The day we met, her smile when I proposed, our wedding, our kids' births, and then the picture with Brandon. I clenched my fists, anger and sadness mixing together, but I didn't want to give up. I wanted to protect this family, this life. But what do? I looked up at the stars. There were no answers there, just cold, brilliant lights staring down at me. The time off that was coming was a chance to think. My relationship with Emily, the kids, my life in this town. I needed to evaluate it all. I took a deep breath and resolved to get through this ordeal, no matter how difficult it would be. For my family, for myself. I closed the window and headed to bed. Tomorrow was a new day, and maybe, just maybe, the start of a new chapter in our lives, for better or worse. Sunlight streamed into the kitchen. I sat sipping coffee, silent. Emily sat across from me, equally silent. The kids were asleep upstairs. This quiet was a stark representation of our current state. Mike, Emily broke the silence. What's going to happen to us? I sighed heavily. Honestly, I don't know. For a week, I'd been thinking. Anger, sadness, and the beginnings of resignation. All those emotions swirled inside me, but I still didn't have the answers. Is it really over with Brandon? My voice quivered. Emily met my eyes, looking straight at me. Yes, it's over. Her words brought a mix of relief and bitterness. Just because it was over didn't mean the hurt would disappear. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Who could that be? Emily tilted her head. I got up and went to the door. When I opened it, Brandon stood there. Mike, his voice was tense. I need to talk to you. For a moment. Anger welled up inside me. This man had ruined my life. but I took a deep breath and forced myself to remain calm. Fine, come in. When we got back to the living room, Emily's face was pale. Brandon, why? Brandon sat down, looking at both of us, his shoulders slumped. First, let me apologize. I know that's not enough, but I caused a lot of trouble for the two of you. He ran a hand through his hair, his voice laced with exhaustion. I screwed up big time. I listened silently, waiting for the but. Actually, Brandon continued, his voice barely a whisper, things are complicated. I am leaving town. What? Emily's voice was sharp, laced with panic. Yeah. Brandon nodded, not meeting our eyes. The new project in New York. Well, it's not really about the new project. He paused, taking a deep breath. This whole mess. This town is too small, and word got around. The whispers, the stares, it followed me. It followed my company. He finally looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and anger. The contracts, they all started getting canceled, one after the other. The investors are pulling out. I am up to my neck in debt. He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping him. I can't afford to stay. I can't do business here anymore. It's over. I looked at him, the mixed emotions swirling within me. Anger was still there, but so was a strange sense of almost pity. It was a mess of his making, but he was being crushed by the weight of it, and there was something about that cut through the anger. I'll be honest, Brandon continued, his voice now flat. My relationship with Emily, it was important to me. He stopped talking, his eyes fixed on the floor. But, I prompted, but it was a mistake. Regret colored Brandon's eyes. We just gave in to each other's loneliness, and it was selfish. It hurt more people than just me or you. Emily nodded slightly, tears streaming down her face. Yeah, Mike. Brandon finally turned to me, his voice tight. You are a good man. Take care of Emily. You are much better than a guy like me. Shut up, I interrupted, my voice rising. I don't need to hear that from you. The truth was, I didn't want to be better. I wanted my life back. Brandon nodded silently, accepting my words. I am grateful you are leaving, I added, a bitter edge to my voice. A heavy silence descended upon us. Well, Brandon stood up, his posture defeated. I am going now. You two do whatever it is you have to do. After he left, Emily and I faced each other again. Mike, tears glistened in Emily's eyes. I am so sorry. Wait. I raised my hand. Don't say anything right now. I stood up and looked out the window. The sky was clear. The view was the same as always, but it felt like everything had changed. Emily, I turned back to her. Tell me honestly, do you want to try to fix our relationship? Emily closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then she slowly opened them. Yes, I do. Determination filled her voice. Mike, I don't want to lose you. I want to protect our family. I nodded slightly. Okay. But it's going to take time. I know. Emily stood up and walked towards me. But I'll work hard. I'll do anything to fix our relationship. I looked at her. I felt a glimmer of the love I had for her returning. Let's do it, I said quietly. Tears streamed down Emily's face. She threw her arms around me. I am sorry. I am so incredibly sorry. I held her close. My anger was still there. My hurt hadn't healed, but her warmth sparked a flicker of hope for our future. Just then, we heard the kids' voices from upstairs. Daddy! Mommy! We looked at each other and managed a small smile. Let's go, I said. The kids are waiting. Emily nodded. Yeah, let's go. As we walked up the stairs, I pondered. I wasn't sure if this was the right decision, but for my family and for myself, I decided to give us another chance. When we got to the top of the stairs, the kids ran to us. Daddy, Mommy. We hugged them tightly. In that moment, everything felt right. Good morning, little guys. I forced a smile. Want to go out somewhere today? The kids cheered. Emily looked at me, surprised. Really? Hope sparked in her eyes. Yeah, I nodded. It's a new beginning for the whole family. A genuine smile finally graced Emily's face. Let's get ready then, she told the kids. It's a special day. The kids raced to their rooms. Emily and I faced each other again. Mike, Emily whispered. Thank you. I simply nodded. Words weren't needed. We got started on dinner together. Emily chopped vegetables while I grilled the meat. The kids helped set the table. Hey, Daddy. Amy came over to me. You and Mommy are getting along really well lately. I stumbled over my words for a moment. Kids are impossible to fool. Yeah, I smiled. Your dad and Mom are trying their best. Amy nodded, seemingly satisfied. We laughed together around the dinner table. We talked about everyday things. The kids' school day, Emily's volunteer work, my job. Just a normal family having a normal dinner. But for us, it was a precious moment. After dinner, when the kids were asleep, Emily and I sat in the living room drinking tea. Mike, Emily spoke softly. Are we going to be okay? I looked straight at her. Yeah, we're going to be okay. Tears welled up in her eyes. Really? Yeah, I said with conviction. We're going to keep walking this path together. Through thick and thin. Together. Emily leaned against me. I felt comfort in her closeness. Outside, the night wind rustled the trees. A quiet night. But in our hearts, the beat of a new beginning echoed. This was our restart. It wasn't perfect, and whispers still lingered around town, neighbors casting sideways glances, rumors refusing to fade entirely. I hadn't forgiven her completely, not yet, but I knew that someday, maybe not soon, but someday, I could find it in my heart to let go of the pain. There was a definite glimmer of hope. We had started a new life in this town, in this house. We couldn't change the past, but the future was ours to shape. Listening to Emily's gentle breathing, I made a promise to myself. I would protect this family, this love, and tomorrow, another new day would dawn, full of promise and the strength to keep moving forward, despite the shadows of the past. Together, we would face whatever came our way, building a future filled with love and hope, one day at a time, healing and growing stronger with each passing day. The key clicked too loud, an echo in the silent apartment, a silence that felt wrong, a held breath instead of the usual chaos. No hairspray, no music, just a stillness that pressed on my chest. Then, from the bedroom, a soft, rhythmic creak, the sound of a bed being used, not slept in. And I knew, with a cold certainty that had nothing to do with logic, that my surprise had turned into a nightmare. I tossed my bag onto the couch, the thud muffled by the fabric. Honey, I am home, I called out, my voice echoing. No answer. A frown creased my forehead. She usually texted if she was going to be late from the salon. A quick glance at my phone showed no messages from her. Maybe she's napping? I walked towards the bedroom, a sense of unease beginning to settle in my gut. Then I heard it, a soft, rhythmic creaking sound, like an old bed frame protesting under weight. Initially, I thought it was the television, or maybe her computer speakers acting up again. But we didn't have a television in the bedroom, and her computer was always on the desk in the living room. I paused, my hand hovering over the doorknob. What the hell? The creaking continued. I pushed the door open gently, the hinges squeaking a soft protest, and stepped inside. The sight hit me like a punch to the gut. Sarah was there, in our bed, but she wasn't alone. A guy, whose back was to me, well, he was right there with her. My breath caught in my throat. It was her salon manager, Mark. I knew him. Smug, slicked back hair, always had that "I am better than you" look. I stood frozen. For a moment, time seemed to stop. I just stared. Then, a slow, cold anger began to coil in my stomach. I took a step back and reached for the doorknob as if it was a lifeline. I had to get out of there. But I couldn't. Not yet. I pulled out my phone and my heart pounded. I could feel my pulse in my ears. My hands shook slightly as I navigated to Sarah's email app. Had to see it. Had to know. A quick search for Mark's name revealed a string of emails stretching back 3 months. "Meet me at the hotel after your client," one read. "Can't stop thinking about last night. The way you move," read another. The emails were filled with explicit details. The sickening truth hit me in waves, each one making me feel colder and more distant. 3 months. That's how long she'd been sleeping with him? Every "love you" text to me, every goodnight kiss, was a lie. I closed my eyes for a second. Inhale, exhale. I needed to be calm. Couldn't explode right now. I tucked the phone back in my pocket and walked back into the living room. I sat on the couch, my mind a whirlwind of betrayal and anger. I stared at the wall, letting the sound of the creaking from the bedroom beat against my eardrums. I will not let them know I am here. Not yet. I sat there, feeling numb, waiting for the sounds of their betrayal to subside. A few minutes later, the bedroom door opened. Mark stepped out, his shirt half buttoned, a smug look on his face that vanished the instant he saw me. His eyes widened, and the color drained from his face. He looked like a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar. "Hey," he stammered, trying to close the door behind him, but I was faster. I grabbed the door, slamming it open. "You," I said, my voice low and dangerous. He fumbled, trying to shut the door again. "Dude, listen. It's not what it looks like," he said, his voice suddenly trembling. He looked around, as if searching for an escape route. "Oh, really?" I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Because it looks like my wife and my salon manager just finished having sex in my bed." I grabbed him by the collar, pulled him out of the doorway. He stumbled forward, and I stared right into his eyes. "Tell me, Mark, how long has this been going on?" It was one time," he stammered, his eyes wide and darting. "She was stressed about work, and I was just comforting her. I swear." He tried to pull away, but I held him tight. It wasn't like anything serious. His words were like gasoline on a fire. My anger surged. I didn't want his lies. I wanted to make him pay. I stared at Mark, his face a mask of fear and desperation. Comforting her? I spat, my grip tightening on his collar. "You think I am stupid? I saw the emails, Mark. 3 months. 3 fucking months of comforting?" My voice was rising, the calm facade cracking. I wanted to smash his face right there, but I needed answers, and I wanted Sarah to hear this. I pushed him back against the wall. the plaster cracking under his weight. "You are not going anywhere, buddy," I growled, stepping in front of the doorway. He looked trapped, his eyes darting to the door, then back to me. "Look, man, I am really sorry. It wasn't like that. She didn't mean anything by it," he stammered, his voice a nervous whine. "I swear, it's not my fault." I ignored him and turned toward the bedroom door. "Sarah!" I yelled, my voice echoing. "Get your ass out here now." A moment of silence, and then the soft rustling of sheets. She appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide with panic, clutching a sheet to her chest. Her face was pale, and her hair was a mess. I'd always thought it looked beautiful, even when it was wild. But now, it just made me sick. "Please, don't yell," she whispered, her voice trembling. She looked from me to Mark, then back to me, fear clouding her eyes. "Oh, you know," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Just catching up with your boyfriend here." I gestured to Mark with a jerk of my head, who looked like he wanted to disappear. Sarah gasped. "It's not like that," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, just let me explain." Her gaze dropped, her eyes fixed on the floor. I just stared at her, feeling a bitter laugh rising in my throat. "Oh, you'll explain all right. You both will." I pushed Mark towards the bedroom. "Get back in there." He stumbled back inside, and I followed, not taking my eyes off either of them. I turned to Sarah, my voice barely a whisper now. "Start talking." She looked down at her hands, which were shaking uncontrollably. It started when he promised to introduce me to some famous people," she mumbled, barely audible. "He said he could get me closer to my dreams." She finally looked up at me, her eyes brimming with tears. "He told me that if I wanted to be successful, I had to play the game." Her lower lip trembled. "He kept saying I was talented, and I had potential, but that I wasn't using it to my full advantage. He made me feel like I wasn't good enough if I didn't use his connections. He said it was the only way to get my foot in the door." My jaw clenched. I remembered when she first came to this city, full of hope and determination. Fresh out of beauty school, she'd juggled a day job at that dumpy salon with late nights at a bar, just to make rent and have money for her portfolio. Her dream of becoming a famous hairstylist, it had always been her driving force. I met her after she'd finally gotten that assistant gig with some big-name stylist. I'd been proud of her, watching her hustle and work towards her goals. We had met, fallen in love, got married. I'd supported her when she went freelance. I'd never doubted her passion. It had been intoxicating to watch her succeed. I looked at her now and saw a woman I barely recognized, defeated and broken. He said he had connections, television producers, artists, and they all needed a stylist, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "He said we were a team, that we were destined for bigger things, that I had the talent but I just needed his help to get there." She wiped a tear away, smudging her makeup. "He kept pressuring me, telling me it was the only way to make it." She finally looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. "He kept saying it was a necessary evil. I felt like I had no choice." "No choice?" I echoed, the anger bubbling back to the surface. "You had no choice but to sleep with him, for a job?" My voice was shaking. "I can't believe this." I thought of the nights we had spent together. Always safe, always using protection. I looked at the disheveled bed, a wave of nausea washing over me. Did you guys use protection?" I demanded, my eyes narrowing. My voice was barely a growl. Mark looked like he was going to faint. He looked from me to Sarah, then back again. I pulled out," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. My blood ran cold. I lost it. All the calm I had managed to maintain vanished. "You fucking idiot!" I roared, lunging at him. I grabbed him again, pulling him off balance. I unleashed a flurry of punches, each blow landing with a sickening thud. His head snapped back, and he crumpled to the floor. He curled into a ball, groaning in pain. I wanted to keep going, but I forced myself to stop. I turned back to Sarah, who was staring at me, her face a mixture of shock and fear. The sound of her sobs were drowned out by the roar of my blood rushing in my ears. I needed to calm myself. I forced myself to take a deep breath. I stood over Mark, panting, my fists still clenched. He was a mess, a whimpering pile on the floor. I didn't feel better, just empty and bone-deep tired. I grabbed the roll of duct tape from the closet. I used it to hang up posters and started wrapping it around Mark's wrists and ankles. He tried to protest, but I glared at him, and he shut up. "Don't even," I said, pulling the tape tighter. Then I dragged him across the room, back to the bed, and dumped him next to Sarah. I ripped off a few more pieces of tape and secured Sarah as well. Back to back, like some twisted, grotesque couples game. They were both crying now, their sobs mingling with the sound of my ragged breathing. I looked at them, disgust twisting my face. "I need a drink," I muttered, walking out of the room, leaving them bound on the bed. I went to the living room, my head pounding. I grabbed Mark's phone from the floor, where it had fallen during the fight. I found his wife's contact, a name that had appeared in Sarah's emails. Jennifer. I hesitated, then did a quick search of his messages. A string of messages from women's names I didn't recognize came up. "You are amazing. Last night was incredible. Meet me at the hotel?" It was like a sickening catalog of his infidelities. My stomach churned, and the cold anger I thought was gone came surging back. He had done this before, and Jennifer had to have known. I took a deep breath and hit the call button. The phone rang twice before she answered. "Hello?" she said, her voice slightly wary. "Jennifer, this is Sarah's husband," I said, my voice flat. "You need to come over here. Now." There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then, What's going on? Is Mark okay?" Her voice was tight with concern, but I could also hear a note of weariness underneath. "He's fine," I said, my voice laced with sarcasm. "He's just having a little domestic situation." I paused. "You need to come here. Now. I am not going to repeat myself." I hung up, not waiting for her reply. I looked around the living room, at the mess of my things, the pictures of Sarah and I smiling happily, the evidence of my life. It all felt like a lie, a cruel joke. I slumped onto the couch, my body aching. I felt bone-tired, the anger giving way to an immense weariness. The weight of betrayal pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. I leaned my head back, closing my eyes. I could still hear Sarah sobbing from the other room. How could she do this? How could he do this again? I thought, my mind going over it again and again. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the apartment buzzer. I didn't move. "Go away! Go away!" I wanted to yell, but I didn't. A moment later, the doorbell rang. I dragged myself up and opened the door. Jennifer stood there, her face pale and drawn. She looked from me to the apartment, her eyes wide. "What's going on?" she asked again, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't answer, just gestured for her to come in. She stepped inside, her eyes darting around nervously. I led her to the bedroom. She stopped at the doorway, and her eyes widened, and then her hands flew to her mouth. Mark saw her, and he froze, his body going rigid. He looked terrified. I glared at him. "Face my wife, you bastard," I said, my voice low. He turned and started to cry, tears streaming down his face. "I am so sorry," he whimpered, his voice cracking. "Jennifer, I am so sorry. I didn't mean to. It was a mistake." Sarah started crying harder too, tears streaming down her face. "I am so sorry," she sobbed. "I never meant to hurt you. I am so sorry." I looked at them both, their pathetic displays of remorse making me sick to my stomach. "I'll never forgive you," I said to Mark, my voice cold and flat. I stepped closer to Mark, looming over him. "You are going to tell her everything, Mark," I said, my voice dangerously low. "You are going to tell Jennifer what you did, what you've been doing, every single detail." I grabbed his phone from the floor and held it up. "You are going to confess right now to your wife. You are going to tell her about Sarah and all the other women." I could see the color drain from his face as he looked at the phone. "Tell her about how you manipulate them, how you promised them careers and connections. You are going to tell her everything, every single detail. I want to hear you say it, and I want them both to hear it." I pushed the phone into his face and made sure that Sarah and Jennifer could hear me too. "Go on, Mark, tell her." I watched his face, relishing the fear in his eyes. He knew he was cornered now. He looked at Jennifer, his eyes wide with terror. He looked at Jennifer, his eyes wide with terror. He took a shaky breath, his voice cracking as he began to speak. "Jennifer, I am sorry." He was stammering, struggling to form words, his eyes darting nervously between Jennifer and me. He wouldn't meet her gaze. There is been other women. It wasn't just Sarah. I lied to you. I manipulated them. I promised them things, promised them careers. His voice was barely a whisper now, each word like a piece of shattered glass. I watched him, my anger, a cold, hard knot in my stomach. It wasn't enough. Nothing he could say would ever be enough. He deserved to suffer, to feel the way I was feeling. Why? I wanted to scream, but I just kept staring at him. My eyes narrowed, my body tense. I wanted him to see the hate in my eyes. As he confessed, a strange fog descended over my mind. I saw flashes of Sarah, her smile, the way she laughed, our quiet nights together, her excitement over new job opportunities. All the memories of those happy days seemed distant now, like a dream, a life that had been stolen from me. Those shared moments, now tainted and disfigured. The memory of her face, the way she used to look at me, the way she looked at me now, and I thought of the bed, of the wrinkles, of what had been done in my apartment. In our bed, the feeling of his hands on her, the thought was like a sickness. Then, a blinding flash of pain, and everything went black. I felt a sharp, intense impact, like a hammer blow to the back of my head, and the world tilted, the room spinning around me. I stumbled, my knees buckling, and I felt myself falling into an endless abyss of darkness. I could hear a high-pitched ringing in my ears, like a swarm of angry bees, and a jumble of voices, but I couldn't make sense of them. Through a hazy, blurred vision, I saw a flicker of movement, a flash of silver, and then Jennifer's face, contorted with a rage that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. Her eyes were wide, her mouth a tight, angry line. She was holding something in her hand, something that gleamed, under the dim light of the room, a long kitchen knife. Then, darkness swallowed me whole. I don't know how long I was out. It could have been minutes or hours. When I finally came to, my head was throbbing, my body aching, my limbs heavy and unresponsive. I was lying on the floor, my vision still blurry, my mind struggling to make sense of what had happened. I could feel a sticky wetness on the back of my head and the metallic tang of blood in my mouth. I managed to sit up, my head spinning, and slowly my vision started to clear, the blurry shapes slowly resolving into sharp outlines. I looked around, my heart pounding in my chest, each beat echoing the frantic rhythm of my fear. The room was a mess, a chaotic scene of destruction and despair, a tableau of violence and betrayal that had transformed our apartment into a nightmarish landscape. Mark and Sarah were still bound, back to back, the duct tape still holding them in place, their bodies rigid, like puppets with their strings cut. But there was something terribly, horribly wrong, an invisible shift in the atmosphere, a chilling stillness that made my blood run cold. Mark was slumped against the bed, his body appearing unnaturally still, his head lolled to one side, his dark hair stark against the pale sheets, and I could see, even from this angle, that his body was not moving. A dark, spreading pool of blood surrounded him, staining the carpet a horrifying crimson, the color a stark contrast against the pristine white fabric, and I realized, with a sickening lurch of my stomach, that he was not moving, that he was not breathing, that he was gone. Sarah was next to him, her body shaking uncontrollably, her back pressed against his, the tremor of her fear almost palpable, her breath coming in shallow, panicked gasps. She was whimpering, calling out over and over again, her voice raw with terror. "Mark? Mark, please say something. Mark, answer me. Mark." Her voice rose in desperation, each call a desperate plea against the silence, and as she screamed, she tugged at the duct tape, her body writhing against her restraints, a frantic dance against the impossible. And Jennifer was gone. The apartment was deathly quiet, apart from Sarah's frantic whimpering, a silence that was heavier than any sound, that pressed down on me like a physical weight, suffocating me with its horror. I scrambled to my feet, panic rising in my chest. What had happened? What the hell had happened? I stumbled to the living room, my hands shaking as I grabbed my phone. I dialed 911, my voice trembling as I spoke. "I need the police. Now, there has been a stabbing. My address is..." I rattled off the address, my voice breaking. "Hurry," I begged, my heart pounding in my chest. "Please, hurry." I hung up and stumbled back to the bedroom, my head spinning, my heart racing. Sarah was still whimpering, her body shaking uncontrollably. I tried to reach out to her, but my hand hovered in the air. I had no idea what to say or how to comfort her. A moment later, the apartment door burst open, and 2 police officers rushed in, their faces grim. One officer went straight to Mark, checking for a pulse, while the other pulled out his notebook, his eyes scanning the scene. "What happened here?" the officer demanded, his voice sharp and authoritative. I just stared at him, my mind struggling to process the events of the past few hours. My wife's betrayal, the manager's death, it was all too much. I didn't know where to start. I felt numb, like I was walking through a fog. I had seen him die, I had seen the blood, I had heard the screams, and I couldn't seem to separate it from reality. I don't know," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. "His wife, she just snapped." The officer turned to Sarah, his face softening slightly. "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened?" he asked gently. Sarah was shaking too much to speak, but she nodded slowly. She tried to explain, her words broken and disjointed, about the affair, about Jennifer's arrival, about the knife, and then, finally, about the attack. She was barely coherent, her voice thick with tears and shock. The officer wrote everything down, his face grim. He asked me a few questions, my answers brief and fragmented. The scene was surreal. It felt like I was watching it all from far away, as if this were a movie. They separated us for questioning, sitting us on opposite ends of the living room, keeping us apart. The police were thorough, their questions sharp and probing. I told them about the affair, about the duct tape, and about Jennifer's arrival. I tried to explain the chaos of the evening, but it all sounded so unreal. The entire situation, the betrayal, the violence, the death. It was all too much. A few days had passed. The police had secured the scene and apprehended Jennifer. Now, they needed a follow-up. The officer, his face weathered, his eyes kind, met me at the hospital. He led me to a quiet waiting area. The sterile smell was always a reminder of sickness and death. He sat opposite me, notebook open. "We need to clarify a few things," he said. "Just a follow-up. Try to remember everything. Every detail might be important." I recounted the night, the betrayal, the tape, Jennifer, the violence, Mark's confession, a flash of silver, the pain, waking up to the horror. He listened, his pen moving. He asked, "Did you know Jennifer had a history of domestic violence? Had Mark mentioned anything?" "No," I whispered. He nodded, grave. "She filed multiple police reports against Mark over the years. Each time she said he was seeing other women. They fought about it, sometimes physically. She knew about his affairs. She had been tracking him." The words hit me. She had been desperate and determined. "So, what happens now?" He shook his head. "Jennifer will be charged, face trial. As for you, that's something you'll have to figure out." He left, and I was alone, the information suffocating. I walked to Sarah's room. She lay still, her face pale, eyes closed. She was broken. Watching her, a realization washed over me. I had been focused on my own pain, my own betrayal. I had missed her suffering. I couldn't leave her. Not now, not ever. I had thought of leaving, of cutting ties, letting her deal with her choices. But seeing her now, I felt something shift. The anger was still there, but mixed with responsibility, a need to protect her. Not driven by hate, but fear. Fear that I had been powerless to stop it. I couldn't let that fear control me anymore. I didn't know what the future held, if we would ever heal. But I wouldn't abandon her. I had to stay, to protect her, help her rebuild. Even if it meant carrying this burden forever, I would stay. That was all that mattered. I reached out, took her hand. It was cold, fragile. She didn't look at me, but she didn't pull away. And in that silent moment, a decision was made. We would face the future together, two broken souls clinging to each other for survival. Our story wasn't over. It was just beginning, bound by shared pain, by shared loss, by a love that had been tested and transformed.
The day Ethan walked into our office, I knew he was trouble. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the marble floor of Morgan and Davis Investment Group, and I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just another suit. This was a predator in a designer jacket. Little did I know, his arrival would set off a chain of events that would shatter my world. John, isn't it? He flashed that movie star smile at me on his first day, extending a manicured hand. I hear you are the steady one around here. We should grab coffee sometime. We never did grab that coffee. Instead, I watched him work his magic from my cubicle, closing deals that seemed impossible. The way he handled Mr. Davis, our biggest client, was like watching a master manipulator at work. He'd lean in just the right way, laugh at just the right moment, dropping casual mentions of golf scores and boarding school connections. "Ethan's got the magic touch," our supervisor would say, shaking his head in wonder as another seven-figure deal rolled in. But I noticed things others missed. The way certain numbers didn't quite add up, the hushed phone calls in the stairwell, the clients who seemed oddly eager to sign whatever he put in front of them. Our paths crossed more frequently when we both got engaged around the same time. His fiancée Jessica was everything you'd expect, young, beautiful, and completely enchanted by it. My Mary was different, practical, grounded, with a quiet beauty that grew on you. We ended up at the same restaurant for our engagement celebrations, purely by chance. To successful marriages and successful careers. Ethan had raised his glass that night, champagne sloshing dangerously close to the rim. I remember how Jessica gazed at him adoringly while Mary squeezed my hand under the table. The futures ahead of us seemed so bright, so certain. Looking back, I should have seen the cracks forming even then. The way Ethan's eyes lingered a fraction too long on Mary. The slight tremor in Jessica's laugh when he made another grand promise. But hindsight is a cruel teacher, and I was too focused on keeping pace with his shadow to notice the darkness it cast. Even during office parties, Ethan had a way of making everyone else feel like supporting actors in his one-man show. He'd command attention with stories of his latest yacht trip or his new penthouse, while I'd stand in the corner, nursing a beer, and wondering how he afforded it all on the same salary as mine. "You know what your problem is, John?" he said to me one night after closing another massive deal. "You play it too safe. Life's about taking risks." He adjusted his Rolex, a gift from Mr. Davis, he claimed, while I thought about my mortgage payments and my daughter's future college fund. The whispers started about 6 months after his marriage to Jessica. Administrative assistants exchanging glances when he walked by. Numbers that didn't match in quarterly reports. Client meetings that weren't logged in the system. I told myself it wasn't my business, that focusing on others' success was a recipe for misery. Then came the Davis account irregularities. Small discrepancies at first, easily explained away by market fluctuations, as Ethan called them. But they grew like shadows at sunset, stretching longer and darker until they couldn't be ignored. "You worry too much, John," he'd say, clapping me on the shoulder whenever I raised concerns. "Everything's under control." His trademark confidence never wavered, but I started noticing how his gaze didn't match it anymore. Mary and I hosted dinner parties occasionally, and Ethan and Jessica would come. He'd charm everyone with tales of his latest triumphs while Jessica sat quietly, her smile becoming more strained each time. Mary seemed fascinated by his stories, leaning forward in her chair, laughing at all his jokes. I told myself it was just politeness, that my wife was simply being a good hostess. The last time I saw Ethan in the office before everything fell apart, he was standing in Mr. Davis's doorway, that same winning smile plastered on his face. But his knuckles were white where they gripped his leather portfolio, and there was a slight sheen of sweat on his forehead. "Just another day in paradise," he called out to me as he passed my desk. If I'd known then what was coming, maybe I would have said something different. Maybe I would have tried to stop what was already in motion. But I just nodded and turned back to my computer, letting him walk away with his secrets and his lies. not realizing how deeply they would eventually cut into all our lives. My daughter Emma's first birthday party was perfect, or at least it was trying to be. Pink and white balloons bobbed against the ceiling of our living room, while autumn sunlight streamed through the bay windows. The smell of vanilla cake mixed with coffee as our relatives chatted, and Emma's delighted squeals punctuated every new discovery of wrapping paper and ribbons. Then my phone buzzed. Ethan's name flashed across the screen, and something in my gut tightened. He never called on weekends. "John?" His voice cracked, something I'd never heard before. "I need your help. Please. It's bad." Mary caught my eye from across the room where she was adjusting Emma's party dress. She must have seen something in my expression because her smile faltered. "It's Emma's birthday, Ethan. We're in the middle of—" I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. The desperation in his voice was real. In the background, I could hear what sounded like breaking glass and, was that a baby crying? "Please, John, I don't know who else to call." 20 minutes later, I was pulling into the parking garage of his luxury high-rise, guilt gnawing at my stomach. I'd left my own daughter's first birthday party. Mary's tight-lipped, "Do what you have to do," still rang in my ears as I rode the elevator to the luxury apartment. The screaming hit me before I even reached their door, high-pitched wails that echoed down the marble hallway. A middle-aged woman in yoga clothes stood outside their unit, bouncing a red-faced baby while speaking rapidly into her phone. "Oh, thank God," she said when she saw me. "Are you John? I am their neighbor, Clara. I've been out here for almost an hour trying to calm little Sophie down." "They're still." She glanced at the door, where I could hear what sounded like warfare inside. The baby, Sophie, hiccuped and reached for me instinctively. I'd had enough practice with Emma to know the move, and my arms automatically came up to take her. Her diaper felt heavy, and her cheeks were tear-stained and hot. "I gave them my number if they need anything else," Clara said, hesitating. "But maybe you could stay for a bit." The worry in her eyes spoke volumes about what she wasn't saying. The penthouse had transformed into a war zone, with designer clothes strewn across the polished floors like fallen soldiers, and a Hermes tie dangling limply from the crystal chandelier. The sound of breaking glass came from the master bedroom, followed by Jessica's voice, raw and furious. "You absolute bastard!" Ethan lounged on his white leather sofa, wearing nothing but a towel and scrolling through his phone. Empty whiskey glasses dotted the coffee table around him. He barely glanced up when I entered. "Oh, good. You are here," he said, as if we were meeting for a casual lunch. "Jessica's having a bit of a moment." Another crash from the bedroom. A moment? I shifted Sophie to my hip, noting her whimpers had quieted slightly. "What the hell is going on?" "Just a small misunderstanding about some business transactions." He waved his hand dismissively. "Look, I need you to take Sophie for a few hours while we sort this out. I've got some calls to make about this amazing opportunity that just came up. Could be 7 figures easy." Before I could respond, Jessica stormed out of the bedroom. Mascara streaked down her face, clutching what looked like bank statements. 7 figures? Is that how much you lost this time? Or is it more? I found myself backing toward the kitchen, instinctively shielding Sophie from the tension. The baby needed changing, and probably feeding. While Ethan and Jessica screamed at each other about numbered accounts and missing funds, I searched for diapers and formula, finding them buried under takeout containers and unopened mail. "I am calling the police," Jessica threatened, reaching for her phone. Ethan's casual demeanor cracked for a moment. "Do that, and I'll tell them you kidnapped Sophie. John here can be my witness. You are clearly unstable right now." The look he gave me wasn't a request. It was a command. I felt the weight of Sophie in my arms, thought of my own daughter's birthday party I was missing, and made a decision I would later regret. "I'll take her for a few hours," I said gently. "But that's it, Ethan, and you are going to owe me an explanation." He was already back on his phone, that familiar smirk returning. "You are a lifesaver, John. I'll text you when we're done here." As I left with Sophie and her hastily packed diaper bag, Jessica's sobs followed us down the hallway. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was leaving a crime scene, but whether I was rescuing a victim or aiding a perpetrator, I wasn't sure yet. The drive home was quiet, except for Sophie's occasional whimpers. How would I explain this to Mary? And why did I have the sinking feeling that this was just the beginning of something much darker? The guilt of abandoning my own daughter's birthday party gnawed at me. But the situation with Ethan and Jessica was too volatile to ignore. As I pulled into my driveway, I knew I had to find a way to make sense of it all, to figure out where my loyalties truly lay. It was Mary who first noticed something off about Sophie. We were giving her a bath in our bathroom, the remnants of birthday parties still scattered around us. Deflated balloons, crumpled wrapping paper, half-eaten cake. Mary held Sophie with practiced ease, but her expression was strange, almost haunted. "Her eyes," Mary said softly, not looking at me. "She exactly looks like." She didn't finish the sentence, just handed Sophie back to me abruptly and busied herself with cleaning up, her movements jerky and uncertain. I wanted to ask what she meant, but Ethan texted just then, saying he'd be over in an hour. When he arrived, he was wearing a fresh suit, all evidence of the earlier chaos erased except for a slight redness around his eyes. He collected Sophie with barely a thank you, and Mary disappeared upstairs before he could even cross our threshold. The police showed up 45 minutes later. 2 officers, stone-faced, with a tear-stained Jessica between them. She claimed I'd helped Ethan kidnap Sophie. My text messages cleared things up quickly enough, but the look Jessica gave me as they left, part desperation, part determination, stuck with me. Months passed. Emma started walking. Mary grew distant, spending more time at her parents' house, claiming they needed help with repairs. I buried myself in work, trying to ignore the whispers about Ethan's increasingly erratic behavior at the office. Then came the envelope. Jessica was waiting for me in the parking garage after work, a manila envelope clutched to her chest. Her hands shook as she handed it to me. "I didn't want to believe it either," she said quietly. "But they've been lying to us for years." Inside my car, under the harsh fluorescent lights, I opened the envelope. The first photo showed Ethan and Mary at a hotel bar, dated 2 years ago. Her head thrown back in laughter, his hand on her knee. I told myself it could be innocent. Then came the text messages, dozens of them, filled with pet names and secret meetings, hotel receipts, more photos. My hands grew numb as I flipped through them, each piece of evidence another nail in the coffin of my marriage. "There are more," Jessica said, her voice hollow. "I did a DNA test on Emma. She's not yours." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Emma's features, Mary's strange reaction, the timing. It all aligned with a business trip she'd taken to visit her sister. My stomach lurched, and I had to force myself to breathe. "I've been collecting evidence for months," Jessica continued. "Bank records, too. The money he's been stealing from clients? Some of it went to setting Mary up with a secret apartment. They thought they were so clever." She also confessed that the thought of Emma being Ethan's daughter crossed her mind during Sophie's custody battle, which prompted the DNA test. The parking garage seemed to spin around me. Every memory of the past 2 years shifted, reformed into something ugly. The late nights at work, the weekend, family visits. The way Mary always defended Ethan at dinner parties. She had met Ethan initially at the office engagement party, and they had secretly started meeting afterward. "Why are you showing me this?" My voice sounded strange. distant. Jessica's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. Because I think it's time they faced consequences. Real ones. And I can't do it alone. And, she paused, her voice shaking slightly. I had to know the truth about Emma, too. I thought of Emma, sleeping peacefully at home, unaware that her world was about to shatter. I thought of the birthday party, ruined because I'd rushed to help the man who'd betrayed me. I thought of Mary's face when she held Emma, guilt disguised as concern. What did you have in mind? I asked, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. A small, bitter smile crossed Jessica's face. I've got a plan. But first, we need to talk about what Ethan's been doing with Mr. Davis's money. Because that's where they're truly vulnerable. The envelope sat heavy in my lap, filled with the ashes of my marriage. However, as Jessica began to outline her plan, I felt something new rising from those ashes. A cold, calculated desire for justice. Or maybe it was revenge. At that point, I wasn't sure I cared about the difference anymore. The Ritz-Carlton lobby sparkled with old money and whispered conversations. Jessica and I sat in leather armchairs, watching the elevator numbers climb. 6 other men were scattered around the space, seemingly absorbed in newspapers or phones, though I could feel their tension matching mine. Each had received the same envelope I had. Each had a score to settle with Ethan. Room 1542, Jessica's text had read. Our surveillance confirmed Mary visited every Thursday afternoon, like clockwork. The predictability of betrayal was almost funny. My phone buzzed. The signal from our man at the front desk. Ethan had just checked in. 10 minutes later, Mary arrived, wearing a blue dress I didn't recognize, probably bought with stolen money. She touched up her lipstick in the lobby mirror, completely oblivious to her husband watching from behind a potted palm. Ready? Jessica whispered. I nodded, my mouth dry. The other men began to move, casually converging toward the elevators. We timed it perfectly, catching the same car as Ethan and Mary, who froze when they saw us. Going up? I asked pleasantly. Mary's face went ash white. Ethan's confident smile flickered but held. John, he started. This isn't. Floor 15. I cut him off, pressing the button. The elevator hummed, carrying its cargo of betrayers and betrayed. Nobody spoke. Mary's perfume, also new, filled the small space, mixing with the tension until it was hard to breathe. The suite door opened to Jessica's keycard, another piece of evidence she'd gathered. Inside, the scene was almost comical. Champagne on ice, scattered rose petals, gentle background music playing. Their little love nest, funded by other people's money and pain. What is this? Ethan demanded. But his voice had lost its usual authority. His eyes darted between faces, calculating angles, searching for escape routes. Mr. Chen from accounting stepped forward first. My wife Angela sends her regards. His quiet voice carried decades of pain. 3 years of lies, Ethan. 3 years while I nursed her through cancer. She lost everything when she trusted your investment advice. Mary pressed herself against the wall, her designer purse clutched to her chest like a shield. John, please, let me explain. Explain what? The words tasted like acid. How you used my daughter's college fund to finance your affair. Or should we start with Emma's real parentage? The color drained from Ethan's face. Behind him, David Martinez, another husband, locked the door with a decisive click. We know everything, Jessica said, pulling out a thick folder. Every hotel receipt, every business lunch, every dollar stolen from client accounts to fund your little adventures. Ethan's famous smile crumbled completely. Those records are confidential. You can't. Actually, Richard Blake from IT interrupted. They're evidence in a federal investigation now. The SEC is very interested in your cooking the books. The room erupted into chaos. Everyone seemed to be talking at once, years of suppressed rage and pain bursting forth like a broken dam. Tom Wilson, whose wife had committed suicide after discovering Ethan's manipulation, had to be physically restrained. Mary collapsed into a chair, mascara running down her face as she finally faced the magnitude of her choices. Ethan, backed into a corner, did what he always did. He tried to talk his way out. Listen, everyone, there has been a huge misunderstanding. I can explain everything. The money's all there. It's just tied up in some temporary investments. Like this? Jessica threw down more papers, bank statements, transfer records, loan agreements. You are $6 million in debt to Anton Kovac. Did you really think borrowing from a loan shark wouldn't catch up to you? The name hit Ethan like a physical blow. For the first time, real fear crept into his eyes. How did you— Your bookie talks a lot when he's drunk, one of the husbands said. Especially about clients who owe him money. You don't understand. Ethan's voice cracked. Kovac will kill me if— That sounds like your problem? I cut in, surprising myself with how cold my voice sounded. Just like it was my problem when you made me complicit in your schemes, when you used my friendship to cover your tracks. Mary stumbled forward, reaching for my arm. John, please, think about Emma. Think about— Emma? The word hung in the air like a loaded gun. Should I think about her too, Mary? About how she is not my child? The silence that followed was deafening. Even the soft music seemed to hold its breath. Here is what's going to happen, Jessica said, taking control of the room. We've already sent copies of everything to the SEC. But Mr. Kovac gets first crack at you both. He's very interested in the properties you used as collateral. You can't do this, Ethan whispered, but there was no fight left in him. The great manipulator had finally run out of moves. As we left them there, surrounded by the evidence of their betrayals, a hollow feeling settled in my chest. The revenge we'd planned so carefully didn't taste as sweet as I'd imagined. Maybe because I knew that somewhere, in a pink bedroom filled with birthday balloons, my daughter was waiting for a world that would never be the same. The other husbands dispersed silently, each carrying their own weight of vindication and loss. Jessica squeezed my hand once before disappearing into the night. Behind us, through the hotel room door, we could hear Mary's sobs and Ethan's increasingly desperate phone calls. Justice or vengeance, the line between them had blurred beyond recognition. But as I drove home through the dark city streets, I realized it didn't matter anymore. Some broken things can't be fixed, only survived. I sometimes see Ethan outside the financial district Starbucks, holding a cardboard sign with shaking hands. His golden hair has dulled to a dirty gray. His designer suits replaced by layers of worn clothing. Most people hurry past, avoiding eye contact. I do the same, though for different reasons. The last time I heard his voice was during the SEC hearings. He tried his old charm on the commissioners, spinning tales about market volatility and temporary setbacks. But Kovac's enforcers had already paid him a visit by then, and the bruises visible above his collar told their own story. The millions he'd stolen from clients had vanished into a black hole of gambling debts and luxury purchases, all traceable back to the secret life he'd built with my wife. Mary fared better, if you can call it that. Her parents took her in, their disappointed silence probably worse than any punishment I could have devised. She lost custody of Emma after the court reviewed her role in Ethan's financial crimes. Her weekly supervised visits are clockwork exercises in awkwardness, with Emma increasingly reluctant to hug the stranger her mother has become. The DNA test kit sits on my desk drawer, still sealed. Some nights, after Emma's asleep, I take it out and turn it over in my hands. One simple swab could answer the question that haunts my dreams. But then I look at her baby pictures, at her smile that mirrors mine, and I put it away again. Some truths feel more like wounds than revelation. Jessica moved to Seattle, sending occasional updates about Sophie. The little girl has her mother's chin, she writes, and her grandmother's laugh. We never discuss whose eyes she has. Some silences are better left unbroken. The office has changed. New faces, new policies, strict oversight. Mr. Davis retired after the scandal broke, his reputation barely intact. Sometimes I catch the newer employees whispering when I pass, wondering about my role in it all. Hero or villain? Victim or vigilante? The lines blur more with each passing year. In the end, revenge didn't heal anything. It just shifted the broken pieces into a different pattern, one we all have to live with now. But when Emma runs to me after school, her arms open and trusting, I know at least one thing survived the wreckage. Sometimes that has to be enough.